so happy today to have a Portland City Council candidate, Daniel DeMelo, here. Thanks for coming, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I just really wanted to have somebody on who's in this new form of government in the race. So I appreciate it. And I also have Kristen here from Rational Portland to kind of help me navigate this. You definitely know way more about city and county stuff than me.
Thanks, Andy. I'm happy to be here and happy to meet Daniel. Thanks for sitting down with us, Daniel.
Yeah. So can we start with how has it been kind of navigating through as a candidate through this new process?
So for those who aren't familiar, right, the Portland City Council, we moved from a system where you had 4 elected city councilors who then the mayor put in charge of each bureau. And they called them commissioners and all this nonsense, right? In the new system, we'll have 4 districts with each electing 3 people by ranked choice, single transferable vote for the wonks out there. And I have frankly had a really good time. It means that when I run into people at events, I am not thinking, oh yeah, this person is definitely my competitor, right? I mean, we're all vying for the same 3 spots, but I might have to work with them, and so I can't be too mean. Mm-hmm. And they can't be too mean either. And so
would you normally be too mean?
Not this early in a race, no, but
not this early. So
no.
the negative ads are coming later.
yeah, not from me, I don't think, but I would be shocked if there weren't some negative ads. Frankly, there's going to be a lot of money in this race.
What makes you think that?
Just the way that I think looking at the Seattle City Council race recently, which was kind of a similar situation. I know Seattle.
Don't you think they have a lot more money there?
They do have a lot more money.
Like an astoundingly amount more money.
Yeah, but I think that this race in particular, because it's kind of experimental, right? People are going to want to make sure that the results reflect what they think is going to happen.
Do you think people have a sense of whether they have control over those, and I say control loosely because you never really do, over those votes with money, given this single transferable vote voodoo that we've thrown into this?
I was going to ask too, can one of you two explain? That's the one piece of this whole thing that I still don't get is the single transferable.
Yeah, I'm interested in whether you think you know what that means or what your understanding is.
Yeah, so, my day job, I'm a software engineer. So one of the first things I did getting into this race is I wrote a bunch of software and did simulations with the single transferable vote. And some people talk about it and they think, oh, it's going to mean a lot of kind of radical candidates are going to get in. But I don't think that's the case. If you look at doing some like Monte Carlo simulations, you can see that it's going to be really a race. It's a system that kind of prioritizes some degree of moderates, right? I think it's a way.
Why is that?
Because the way that the single transferable vote system works is that in a regular ranked choice election, you get the rankings and then you knock out the last place candidate and redistribute their votes to the second choices, right? In this system, if someone gets in and they don't need your vote to be in, it gets redistributed proportionally to second place choices. And I can't speak to the exact math on that because it's a little bit complicated, but
you had to program the math into your software?
Yeah.
So how did you come up with the complicated math to program into the software? And the only reason I'm asking this is because I talked to another software developer who's allegedly in charge of coming up with some of this software officially for the election. And he said he doesn't even know really where to start or how to do it. I mean, they're working on different ideas. And as a member of the public who doesn't know anything about math, you're the expert, I'm not. It's a little terrifying for me to listen to because we're just going to see a bunch of numbers pop up, and it really depends on the input, does it not? It's like garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be clear, I'm a software engineer, but I'm not a math expert. If I'm doing multiplication at my job, like that's a hard day, right? Like, because, usually the software engineering is I'm having the computer do the math. And so when I'm running these simulations, I was just kind of...
But you have to know what to plug in,
I did have to know what to plug in.
Yeah. And so does that, as a candidate, does it concern you that there may be people... I mean, obviously, there are going to be people plugging this in.
Totally.
Does it concern you, this garbage in, garbage out theory, which I think is probably... I mean, you would know better than I do. It's got to be right. Does it concern you that maybe whatever is programmed is not going to be done correctly and therefore you don't have the fair shake that you deserve?
Yeah, I mean, if it came out that the election was decided according to like an algorithm that was bad, then I would be the first person to walk into a courtroom to try and handle
Will
that.
we know that? How will we know that?
I'm hoping that they'll make those algorithms auditable, and ideally they'll be open source, right? And that just means that anyone can look at the code and suggest ways to change it, can make sure that it's following through on what it's supposed to do. Because the garbage in, garbage out is really, really, I think, when you look at training machine learning models, right? If you give the machine learning model a bunch of bad data, then it'll produce a model that we don't really understand.
That isn't accurate or...
Yeah. But with the discrete kind of software engineering, we can just go look at it and then make sure that it works, right? And nobody writes software that works good the first time. That's why you test it a bunch, and hopefully they'll go and test it. Now, I don't know.
I think if I were
they'll
you,
do
I
it.
would be concerned because Oregon, particularly the city of Portland, Multnomah County certainly is not the most transparent place ever. And so have you been asking questions to anybody who's in charge of any of this stuff about whether you'll have access to any of that?
We've not done that particular research, but as soon as we're getting closer to the election, I'm definitely going to be asking those questions. I mean,
Especially given your expertise, it seems like it's something that you'd be able to sort of digest and understand.
yeah. I mean, as soon as it's available, I'm going to be looking at it at like midnight, right? Because I'm also dealing with, a day job and running a
Of
campaign, right?
course.
Like, frankly,
Very difficult.
I get to look at the policy stuff in my free time, right? Because there's all the other aspects of politics that I have to deal with during the day. I would love to be able to take a look. I think anyone should be able to take a look at really any software that the government has written and owns.
Yeah.
100%.
That's cool. Yeah, I didn't even know you did like software stuff, and that's kind of an interesting fit into that. I'm curious, like, do you know, like Seattle, you just mentioned, are some of these new
Well,
cities...
they don't do single transferable vote.
Okay,
Just to be
okay.
clear, no one
okay.
does.
Well, my question,
No
I
one
can't
except
ask.
Malta,
Okay.
as far as I know, does single transferable vote.
How
This is a novel, exotic
do you know?
concept.
Do you know what software they use in Malta? No, I'm just kidding.
No.
I'm just joking.
We may need to find out. I mean, they may have reached
Yeah.
out to them. That's what the first thing
Well,
that I do.
Yeah, that's what I
probably.
was gonna ask. Is like what? Because I like your idea of open sourcing all that. But I'm curious, like, if anyone's done that or if any city's done that. 'Cause
I'm not familiar with that. No.
Yeah.
I mean, I would love to.
So you may be
take a look at it.
groundbreaking in that area. Just sort of, I think people would love that.
To say that software run by the city should be open source.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think it could set a precedent for
Well,
more transparency.
particularly with elections, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so important that people feel that this is legitimate, especially if you are a winning candidate. You're going to want that legitimacy going in and that credibility.
Yeah, and I'm really kind of concerned. I'm glad you mentioned kind of the transparency problem at the county and at the city, right? I'm really kind of concerned with that overall issue because it makes everyone distrust it, no matter whether the response is something that they like or something they dislike, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, part of the reason I'm able to run in this race is that I settled a public records lawsuit up
Okay.
in Washington State.
I saw, something about you are fighting for public records, like openness, which I totally appreciate as someone who's worked in the press for a while.
Yeah,
But that's cool. Yeah, I didn't. You can talk more about that if you
Why
want.
yeah.
Washington State?
So I went to the Evergreen State College.
Oh, I see.
Which maybe
Yeah.
people are familiar with, right?
Yeah.
And I was
Olympia.
I was the news editor at the college paper there.
Okay.
And I reported on a story about how the college had purchased security cameras that were disguised as smoke detectors.
Mm.
And this is, liberal Evergreen State College, right? And I still remember finding out about this. It was March 14th, 2019, which I only remember because it's Pi Day. And we requested the footage. I requested the footage from the college from these cameras and a whole bunch of stuff alongside that, including the receipts and so on. And they knew I was graduating, and so they delayed their public records response. And then I graduated, and then I was, fresh in the world, not really caring. And then a year later, the pandemic happens. I'm living with my partner. It's lockdown. We're bored. And I'm still getting these emails from Evergreen that are like, oh, we'll give you the records in 30 days. And they give me one of these responses every 90 days. And so my pandemic project was wrangling the lawyers to get this this public records suit figured out. And eventually, after discovery and after we started setting up depositions and stuff, they settled.
Wow.
And that is what allows me to live in inner Southeast, and that's what allows me to run in this race.
That's a cool story, though. Yeah, I didn't. I knew like you had involvement in that, but I didn't know that whole story. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really kind of, so people are always shocked to hear that. Oh yeah, this hippie college bought these security cameras that were hidden. I mean, they also bought models that were outlet plugs.
Yeah.
Right.
Sort of spy type cameras, or yeah.
Yeah, and
Do you have any understanding of what the purpose of that was?
so the story they told us was that the press office or the media relations department, someone broke in and stole all the laptops.
Mm.
And then they replaced the laptops. And then someone broke in and stole the laptops again.
Okay.
And then they bought the cameras.
So it's like it happened twice, and they're like, "We got to."
But this was you're saying though that this was throughout the entire campus.
They only bought 2 or 3 cameras, and they put them in this media relations office allegedly to hopefully catch this person as they rob the office a third time. Now, I feel like
You sound skeptical.
well, I mean, if you are robbing an office 3 times, the same office 3 times in a row, like you kind of deserve to get caught, right? You should go and look at something else, right? Like, and they could have had someone sit there. They could have done any number of things, but overall, the fact that they were so resistant to giving us these records from the cameras, it makes me skeptical. I don't have any evidence of any wrongdoing, but I'm not the one who wants to scratch that itch, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because at first they told us, oh, there's no cameras, and we said, no, we already have the receipts.
Oh, they lied.
Yeah, and then they said, oh, there's no footage on the cameras, and we said, that's not how SD cards work.
I see why they settled. Yeah, that's a bad position to be in.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so we thought, oh, it's 3 cameras. There's going to be 3 documents. There's going to be 3 videotapes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in Washington State has a great public records law. I would love just to get some of the basics from that, even put in here in Portland, because in Washington State, if you can prove to a court that a public entity delayed on a public records response, the statutory penalty can be $5 to $100 per document per day.
Yeah, I mean, that would be amazing for us.
Because that's like all I ever saw when I mentioned in my time in the press was like, obviously they're going to kind of slow walk it to begin with, but then once you get the bill, it would be like, we're charging you like $500, $1,000 for like one piece of something.
Yeah.
And,
right, one piece of paper, and then the allegation is it took some secretary 27,000 hours to find it.
So I agree with that. Yeah, like that seems like a great law.
Yeah, because it means that, in this case, I thought it was going to be 3 records, and then they've turned out that these cameras were being run as trail cameras. Mm-hmm. And so they were just taking a picture every time they saw motion. And so instead of it being 3 records that were delayed 3 years, it was 800 records that were delayed 3 years. And so then they have obviously a financial incentive to settle.
Wow.
If you talk with public records attorneys here in Oregon, which I've had the pleasure of meeting with a few, they'll tell you that there's very few public records here in Oregon, public records attorneys, because there's very little money in it.
Yeah, there's no, it's just like you said, there's no teeth, there's no penalty, there's no attorney fees there. If there were, I mean, if we could get this darn legislature to do something like that, I mean, that would be kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then to me, it's like all in the spirit of being an Oregonian. It's like transparency and fairness.
Of course, the legislature doesn't want transparency, but that's a different story.
That's really cool, though.
That's just my opinion.
I also think that's funny because, like, even since I was like in elementary school, people always thought that they're like, "Oh, that's a smoke alarm," but they'll just joke like, "Oh, it's a camera," and like, but that is a real.
But it turned out for you, it was.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I mean, when we found about it in the newsroom, we were like sweeping the office for bugs.
Yeah.
Like we had
That
no
must
idea.
have been surreal.
Yeah, because they wouldn't admit to it for so long. I mean, it really was concerning. And part of the reason that we knew about it in the first place was because another reporter had discovered that the college police department had bought R-15s.
Okay, is that a camera or something?
Like the assault rifle, right?
Oh, okay.
Wait, say more about that. The reason you knew.
AR-15.
Yeah. The reason we knew about that is because another student who was a news reporter at the college paper had discovered that the police department had purchased these AR-15s.
And that's the police department specific to Evergreen.
Yeah.
Like the college.
Yeah. Which, like, I can understand why they might want it. There was a threatened mass shooting a couple years prior.
Right.
But
it is a little alarming.
Yeah, it was mainly
And they weren't public about it, is what you're saying, or?
Yeah, that was the more alarming thing, because it had been a debate on the campus for like 20 years about whether they should have it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And they
so,
just went ahead and did it, and then there was no announcement about doing it, and then somebody uncovers this.
Yeah, someone just looks in one of the patrol cars and they have them all of a sudden.
Seems like you can't really keep that under wraps, pun intended, for long.
No. I mean, because if they had just announced it, even at the same time, it would have blown over. Like, and this blew over.
The school needs a new. I don't know. It's just like concerning to me. The school needs a new PR person who can just be in charge of discussions and trainings about truth and transparency, so that everything doesn't look worse and gets blown up into something like a huge settlement. None of this had to happen. I mean, that's part of what's so bizarre about this.
No. And I mean, frankly, like, the really kind of frustrating thing about this, and, relating it back to the county and the city here, right, is that, like, accountability and transparency, they're not just like good ideas, right? They're not just the right thing to do, but not being accountable and not being transparent, it's also a financial liability.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more that our local government,
1,000,000,000%.
yeah, like, and obviously I would love to see the law here in Oregon be more powerful in terms of getting public records to people, because it's just so crucial. It's just so frustrating. I've had myself to do kind of records requests with the county just in my job as being the chair of this budget advisory committee, just because the county won't give me stuff that I just ask for, right? And I would love to see the city be more upfront with that.
What are you asking for from the county? Because my understanding is, I'm friends with Sharon Myron, who's a current county commissioner, so she's in her last term. And my understanding from her and my friend Julie Brim Edwards, and I think anybody, even Jessica Vega Peterson, if you injected her with truth serum, would admit to this, that there's a fair amount of problems surrounding transparency with the county. And really, since at least the tenure of Deborah Kafori in the county chair position, it's an evergreen type situation. What were your requests to the county? Because my guess is they're very similar to everybody else's. And I'm interested in the county's responses too.
Yeah. So what kind of really got the ball rolling for me at the county was that, so I chair the Joint Office of Homeless Services Budget Advisory Committee. And then I also chair a budget advisory.
You currently chair that.
Yes.
Yeah. And when did you start doing that? Was just this year? Or?
That was, I got appointed, last year, and then I got put in as chair earlier this year in December last year.
What do you think it was about you that caused them to pick you as the person to do that?
So I had to interview to get on any of the budget advisory committees. And
you saw a posting and you were interested.
Yeah. At the time I was helping run the website for the Old Town Community Association, and I was helping kind of tenants union in my building when I was living in Old Town.
Is that the Old Town Community, is that the one that Jesse Burke is part of?
Yeah.
Okay, so you were helping out with that.
Yeah, just with their website.
With their website, sure.
Yeah.
And they have a great website, so you're doing a good job.
I fixed it up a little bit.
It's a beautiful website.
He was mentioning before the show that you used to live down, because I used to live downtown Freeze, but he used to live in Old Town, which is part of that. Sorry, it's really windy here. That's if you hear any of that noise.
I heard about these positions at the county through them, and I decided to apply because I had the time. Something I really believe is that, sometimes if it's your opportunity to do something and it's kind of for everyone, then it's kind of your duty to do it, right? And so I thought, well, I have neighbors in this building, which is predominantly income restricted. They don't have the time. They're working, way too many hours.
Yeah, Old Town is not the place where you're going to find a lot of people with time on their hands to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, and so I thought, well, I have the time. I can, call into a Zoom meeting once a month for 2 hours. Easy enough. I applied, and then, telling them my experience with kind of housing policy and homelessness, not directly, but living with it in Old Town. They put me on the JOHS.
When you say policy experience, what was your policy experience?
I guess I'm just a wonk for it, right? Like I will talk your ear off about the problem we have here in Oregon with 19-unit apartment buildings. About
Oh, I see. So by policy experience, you don't mean that you were in charge of a policy or you ran a policy. You more mean it's something that you're interested in, that you feel that you've educated yourself about and you can talk pretty fluently about. And so obviously they were impressed by that, and then you got on the committee.
Yeah, and they have this whole application process. I mean, I don't really understand why they have a whole application process when they don't have enough people on these committees, but that's besides the point.
Yeah. I know you mentioned that in your article, like you could have used more people helping out.
Yeah. And so what kind of got the ball rolling was that
Oh, I can't imagine. Yeah.
in January, we're meeting with JOHS. And so
And is this after Dan Field gets on as part of JOHS, or was this before the transition?
This is before the transition.
Okay.
We are sitting there. There's 6 of us, and it's a Zoom meeting. And someone on my committee asked the county, about the possibility of adding more people to our committee. There's a question about us not being representative because there was one person of color on the committee, and there was nobody who had previously been homeless, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the county responded saying, oh, yeah, we see the ideal number of people on the committee is 7 to 9 people.
Okay.
And I thought, that's a weird answer. Let me go look that up. And so I go and look, and the county code says 7.
Okay.
And so I asked the county during this meeting, I've pulled it up, and I say, well, why did you say 7 to 9 if the county code says 7? So they say, oh, well, we haven't read that in a while. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go read all of this now, right? Because there has to be other
They
things.
don't know that they're not only not following and not reciting correctly their own code. They don't know their own code, but you do.
Yeah.
This volunteer.
Yeah. And so
That must have been alarming.
yeah, because it really is. There's a lot of stuff in there that they're not on top of.
What are these people getting paid to do? I mean, and also as a taxpayer, and at the time a resident of Old Town, that must have been really frustrating for you.
Yeah, I mean, the way I kind of think about it, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people at the county, is they'll kind of point to it being this kind of side quest. Or this.
What does that mean?
Like that these questions of following the county code are just non-consequential
It's
to
like
the
secondary to.
Yeah. Like
They don't need to. That following their own code is just something they can kind of do or not.
I mean, I would almost be willing to agree with them if the homelessness response was actually really good. I would almost be inclined to it.
Why? Why would you agree with that?
But,
I mean, what's the
I
purpose
wouldn't
of the
actually.
code?
I just like.
Oh, you're saying you let it slide.
I almost.
If it
yeah.
accomplished its goals, you would kind of.
If it was
Sure.
working.
I mean, kind of forget about the details. You seem to be knowing what you're doing, and I'm not going to focus on this. But in the meantime, you're saying I'm seeing a broken system here, and I'm asking you about things that I think are important that your code says you must follow, and you're telling me you don't even know the code, and by the way, you're not following it.
Yeah, I mean, what I will tell them is I'm like, look, following the code is actually really easy. It's written out.
You just
do
read
it. Yeah. Like getting
It's an instruction manual.
Yeah, I mean, getting someone who's homeless, who's addicted to fentanyl, to not be homeless and not be addicted to fentanyl, that's a really hard problem.
Right.
Following county code is an easy problem. Let's start with that.
What you're saying, right? By saying what you're getting at is if they can't even bother to follow their own code directions, how are these people who are allegedly supposed to be in charge of solving things like drug addiction and homelessness, all of that lies at the heart of Multnomah County. How are they supposed to do that if these dimwits cannot follow their own code and don't even seem interested in reading it or understanding it?
Yeah.
And there's not much to understand, like you said.
No, and frankly, our committees are advisory.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any actual real power.
You don't have the teeth,
What
but you can
is the
advise.
point? What is the point of an advisory committee? What is that? What do you think their armchair psychology was in doing that? Because obviously they didn't have to do it. You have no real power. I mean, what is the point of all this? It must serve them in some way. It makes them look like they're getting constituents involved. Is that what this is, do you think? I mean, I'm just asking. I know this is just your opinion or your speculation. I just wonder what you think, since you were in that world, are in that world.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I would point to is that the county code does specify why they thought they should have these committees, right?
I love that you know this.
Yeah.
They probably couldn't tell me this, but yeah, let's talk about this.
No,
So
yeah.
what does it say?
I mean, it's to have the like community involvement, right? And so, it's both having community involvement and saying you have community involvement. But then the other aspect of it was that they thought that these committees would be good ways to get information about the budget process back out into communities, right?
Which only works if you're getting information about the budget process.
Right. Which I...
Oh my God. Daniel, I don't know how you are still doing this and how your head has not exploded. But thank you for your service.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say it's one of the
dry.
reasons I'm interested in you as a candidate, because you seem like the most like skeptical and rational, like in a good way. Like I don't see a lot of that in the playing field at this point. So I like what you bring to.
Thank you.
To the
I
race.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I mean, I am someone who really wants to say, just show me what's working and we'll do that. Right. Like, show me results and we'll do that. I actually had a meeting with Dan Field the other day where I was asking him, how do we as a budget advisory committee advise you when all we can really say is just show us better results, right?
Yeah. What was his answer? I mean, I've heard, as a preface, I'm interested in what you think. I guess first question is, what was his answer to that?
I think the answer was like, well, how do you get, you need input on the values of that response, which
Did that make sense to you?
I mean, I think that's a good answer for, say, a committee that's advising on parks, right? Like if you have a committee that is like, oh yeah, the community really wants to see, more swings that are accessible to people in wheelchairs, or we want to make sure that the investment is spread between neighborhoods in some way, right? Like I can understand having that kind of values driven, answer. When it comes to homelessness, I just want to see the number of people on the streets reduced.
It's such an emergency.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't seem to be treated like one.
No, there should be like alarm bells ringing
There
everywhere,
should be.
right? Like I really can't believe how long it's gone on. I mean, one of the first things I did after being appointed to this committee was I went and read every comprehensive plan to address homelessness we've had here in Portland, right? So there was a 10-year plan in 2005. Obviously, that didn't work. But
you mean every plan that has never worked?
No, yeah.
I didn't even know that, and that's like when I moved here. It was like 2005.
Yeah. I mean, anyone who has a cursory interest in this stuff should go and read Bud Clark's homelessness plan, his 10-point plan, because it has maybe 7 of his points in his 10-point plan are stuff that people will come out today and say, oh, here's our new idea for how to solve this.
Wow.
And they use different language, right? We just kind of cycle words here and there, but
it's the same thing that's been 20, 30 years ago or whatever.
Yeah. And I mean, back then it was like, and you go read the articles, they're like, oh my gosh, there's fortified wine in Old Town.
Right, which is so quaint compared to things like Trank and P2P methamphetamine.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my understanding about the appointment of Dan Field to the Joint Office of Homeless Services, which is, Daniel, is not really joint at all. The city gives him a blank check and then the county does really what they want with it and usually doesn't tell anybody what they're doing with it. So my understanding was Dan was not a typical choice for a Multnomah County chair for the head of the joint office. And I think everybody was sort of hoping for some change in that area. Is that your understanding regarding his appointment, that he was not the typical person that the Multnomah County chair might appoint?
I mean, we were not involved in that decision.
Do you know much about him?
I've had a conversation with him.
That one conversation. I mean, you must have been disappointed, though.
I mean, the thing I'm kind of more disappointed about is that we weren't notified of that decision-making process. We weren't asked to be involved in any way.
And you're supposed to be advisory.
And in particular,
how do you give advice if you don't have anything to advise on?
Awareness,
yeah. I mean, the county has come to us and said, oh, you're only really supposed to be advising on the budget.
Okay.
which is in the name. And so I can understand why they might say that.
Yeah, but you're smart. And so that means that you go, yeah. So when you look at the budget, a key question of anybody, particularly a constituent or a taxpayer, is where is the money going and is it producing results? Right? I mean, that's where you're going with this.
Yeah. I mean, it really is kind of shocking the amount of...
You're not supposed to look into this? I mean, that's just ridiculous. That's part of the budget.
Yeah. And frankly, it's another thing where I want to just defer to the county code again, because the county code says we're supposed to participate in strategic and operational planning. Those are the words.
I love it. So is that what you did? Did you just turn straight there and point to that?
Yeah, and I think I've brought it up in every meeting we've had with the county, because it's, changing the county code, the Board of Commissioners can just do that. It's not like the charter where you have to go and do a vote, right? They can do that. So if those rules aren't working, which if they're not following it, I hope they think that they're not working, then they can just go change the rules. But they haven't.
What are their so when you bring this up in every meeting, are they just going, can you see their heads sort of explode? Are they just getting really frustrated with you?
So the last meeting we had with them, they told us kind of point blank that they wouldn't be responding to news articles we had brought up about recent underspending and then the unanticipated revenue, and this was in June.
Okay.
So
I mean...
If I can really roll back for a second, let me tell you a story.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So we were at that meeting where we had asked about adding people to the committee, which the county chair can appoint someone to the committee at any point. That's what the code says. They just have to be, confirmed by the Board of Commissioners. So we'd asked this question about there being 7 members. And when I'm looking at the county code, it says we're also supposed to appoint someone to a central budget advisory committee.
Okay.
That each of these budget advisory committees is supposed to send someone to.
And that doesn't exist yet, right?
So they told me it was on pause. And I said, that's cool. Will you tell me what that means? And they didn't have anything they could point to. They said that Deborah Kafori had put the committee on pause.
Okay.
And so I said, great, you can show me the order.
Mm-hmm.
You can show me whatever kind of decision she made to do that. And they didn't. And so then I filed a records request to get that
Love
order.
it.
And they said, we don't have a responsive record. And so I said, great, then it's not actually on pause. And so having...
Wow.
So I
That's very brave of you. That's very impressive.
I mean...
And then what's their answer to that?
So after that, so I had gotten in January, we were told it was on pause. I said to the committee, well, why don't you just appoint me to it while it's on pause? That way it's ready to go when it's not on pause.
I'm sure they loved that.
And so I got appointed. And
you did? Okay, good for you.
Because, it's just a simple vote,
sure.
right? And I really appreciate the people on the JOHS Budget Advisory Committee. They've been very
supportive of you. It sounds like good.
And I think, maybe not supportive of me, but supportive of just this effort, right? Because I think everyone's aligned in being skeptical. And as soon as I am on that committee and I get this response that there's no written order putting the committee on pause, I go to the county and I say, hey, you're supposed to assist this committee in meeting. So you'll help me with the next meeting of this committee, right? And they won't. And so I just hold the meeting at the Multnomah County Library and send out the required notices and everything. It is an official public meeting of the county, of a county body.
Did anybody attend?
Yeah, my partner came to do the recording. Sophie Peel from Willamette Week came.
Good for Sophie.
And,
that's great.
Sharon Myron came.
That doesn't surprise me. Sharon is very data driven. And so how did you get the word out that this was going to happen? Like, did you send this information to media or? Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very smart.
Yeah. I mean,
it's a standard press release kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But a lot of people I don't think they'd think to do that.
Yeah,
especially
probably,
a volunteer.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy's doing this volunteer position like it's his full-time paid
I know.
job.
Yeah.
I mean, it was my understanding that sending out the notice was like a legal obligation.
Yeah,
I know,
it
but
could
still, like notice. I mean, did they define notice as like media and etc.? Did
Like-
they specifically define it?
The I think the state law is like, you're supposed to keep a list of interested parties who want to be notified of meetings, and so I just sent it to like the press emails for all the local news.
Because of course no one in the county is keeping this quote unquote list of interested parties and publicizing it.
I mean, I have my list.
Right. So it's not specific. And so you're able to just go, who would be an interested party? And because you have a brain, media would be included in that.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
I just don't think a lot of people would think
No,
that
yeah, I think you're probably
far
right,
ahead.
No, I mean, and at the time it was easy because I was also the only person appointed to the committee. And so when we have this meeting, I'm
Right, who said, I need to be appointed to this.
yeah.
That was very smart.
And so just sitting there, I'm like, well, it does say we're supposed to elect a chair. Obviously, there's just one person. So I'm just going to, for now, say I'll be the chair of this committee, and then we'll just have this very quick 10-minute meeting just to have the meeting.
Mhm.
And from there, eventually the county started saying, oh, yeah, we're going to, support the committee and stuff. But they didn't want to treat this prior meeting as happening as part of this and so on, right? But really this question of, well, can the county chair put one of these committees on pause was just a question that didn't go answered. And
Yeah, it sounds like you didn't get any answers about that.
no. And I have a list of questions that
Oh, so you don't even know if that's something Kafori could have done, period.
the county auditor was very specific in the article that Sophie Peel wrote that it's not something that the county chair could do.
I mean,
Mhm.
and is that something you knew ahead of time, or is that something Sophie found out through her investigation?
That she couldn't.
Yeah, that was something not even within their power.
I mean, my understanding, right, is that, if it's not written out, it's not the power. And I couldn't find anything.
Okay,
that was
you didn't
like-
see anything either.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just very, very troubling to hear.
Yeah.
I'm. How are you feeling about? How are you feeling about all of this? And I mean, not good. But in general, I'm interested in how you're feeling, and also how you think your city council candidacy can
Mhm.
do anything about this. Maybe just bring it to light. I don't know.
I mean, I feel like the most meaningful experience I've had running for office is the time I spend calling people. And from what I hear about people in politics, actually everyone hates doing the phone calls. I really enjoy doing the phone calls because everyone I call has the same problems,
Yes.
right? Everyone I call in Portland has the same issues.
What are they?
Which
Tell us.
It's homelessness. Like, I know the polls show that at 70% of
Yep.
the time, but maybe 90% of the people I get on a phone call want to talk to me about that. And I think all the associated problems, right? Which is safety, which is cleanliness, which is livability, cost of living, people who have small businesses and have problems because of that, right?
So you're basically saying, like, literally everything you're hearing about as far as what people in Portland are concerned about either is homelessness or stems from homelessness.
Yeah. Every once in a while, someone wants to talk to me about parks or something, and I'm
Sure.
excited because
But that's an outlier.
yeah.
So isn't that interesting? And you're sitting on this committee over here at the county where they're supposed to be dealing with all these things.
Yeah, and that the city is supposed to be, an equal partner in this, right? I mean,
What do you know about that?
Yeah,
Because of course it's just as far Sharon says, and everybody on city council says, which is why Mingus Maps city commissioner voted against sending a check. The only one, sadly, and very disappointingly to me, but I'm glad he voted that way, voted to not give the county a blank check because he was tired of the lack of transparency. It didn't seem to make sense to him to just keep funneling money into a failed organization. So what is it, if they're supposed to be a partner, and you're very familiar with this code, which I'm very impressed by, what is your understanding of what is actually supposed to be happening here with this check?
I mean, my kind of frustration with the city on this is that the city hasn't put too many kind of parameters on.
And you
their
think they
participation.
could?
I think the city absolutely could. I mean, the city could be saying, yeah, in order for us to be, part of this partnership, we need the actual cost per bed for shelters? That's the one question I've had for years.
That nobody can tell you.
One of the first things I did on this committee is I went and met with some representatives from the mayor's office because I thought maybe they have questions they want answered. And I said, yeah, the one thing I want more than anything is the cost per bed. And they said, yeah, we want that too. And I thought, well, that's interesting, but
Not what you want to hear, probably.
but I can understand that because it's a tricky
No one's
situation.
collecting that data.
Yeah. I mean, they eventually provided our committee with estimates.
Okay. Something,
Based on
I guess,
what?
you know.
I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. So they say they can even tell you what that's based on.
No, I just want to figure that's like, here's the number of beds,
Yes,
here's the
of course you
cost,
do.
let's divide it and let's get dollars and cents. But
Yeah, because you have a brain. So then you're saying the city can put parameters on this blank check that it gives the county for the Joint Office of Homelessness Services because it's the city's money. They hold the purse strings, and they could all have voted no, just like Mingus did,
yeah.
and have said, we're withholding the money. You're finished. You're done. And so what you're saying is, why wouldn't they just say, we're going to go ahead and give it to you, and here's what we need in return? Or maybe we'll give you an installment.
Yeah.
And if you can deliver on some simple things, the money will keep coming.
Yeah.
Is that the kind of thing that you would do if you win your city council position?
I mean, I think that at the bare minimum, right? I mean,
At the bare minimum, I
yeah,
agree.
Yeah, like I don't ever hand someone money without.
Who does?
to-
Isn't it wild?
I mean, something that I think about a lot is, if you look at the recent report from the auditor about
Right.
JOHS and about these budget advisory
It's
committees.
scathing.
Yeah, and I think one of the most obvious kind of problems is that the county has one piece of software for designating how they want to spend money and one piece of software for designating how they're, actually spending the money day to day, right?
Okay. Which seems like a problem already. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm someone who I keep a budget for myself, right? And I review the spending every month. And if I had to flip between two pieces of software to figure out how I intended to spend money and how I wanted to spend it, it wouldn't work. And I'm just spending a household's income, right? If you're spending billions of dollars.
Billions with a B, literally.
You should have software that's better than the one that's on my phone.
I think that's part of why Sharon, again, the lone brave voice, Sharon Myron was the only one who voted no on that county budget. That was one of the reasons.
Yeah. And I absolutely was excited to see that. I mean, because we just
Finally,
need to-
somebody put their foot down
Yeah. And I just really,
and called it out as crazy.
it's one of those things where it's like, I could understand it being a little bit loosey-goosey when it comes to the money if we were like solving this problem like that, right? Like
Seeing results.
Yeah,
Sure. Then,
yeah.
I mean, by loosey-goosey, I'm assuming based on just the small amount of time I've spent with you, I mean, you seem very precise and sort of to have some kind of moral compass and to be data driven. And so I'm assuming that you mean like a bean counter or something as far as like, hey, an extra 5 cents went to like a box of food that it probably shouldn't have. And I totally agree with you. I mean, basically what you're saying is like, I'm not going to be scrutinizing something to the penny if it's working.
Yeah, and if it's part of, what I think it should be, which is an emergency response, right? Like when a car is parked in front of a fire hydrant and a firefighter needs to get the hose through, he doesn't have to fill out a form in triplicate before, right? Because that's an emergency. But in this case, we're treating this situation that should be treated like an emergency, like it's this thing that we can move slowly on.
Yeah.
Daniel, why are we doing this? What is your armchair psychology about? How did we get here and why are we doing this?
I mean, I'm someone who wants to say that I have kind of a lot of different theories, right? There's no smoking gun here for what
as far
is
as we
going on.
know so far. If there is, you'll find it and let us know. But
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was something.
I actually wouldn't be surprised if you pulled one out. But yes, let's assume that there's not. I mean, what based on your experience and you're sitting on this budget advisory committee, you're running for city council, you're this policy researcher that seems very interested in procedures and knows them pretty well. How did we get here, and where is this complacency coming from?
I mean, I think part of it is just that in the last 10 years, we've had this luxury where we're able to govern by principles or ideals, right? People will step up and say, well, we have just all of these resources available. We just need to get people in office with the right ideals, right? And also nowadays we have the money to do these things. We've put in these tax measures that provides a lot of money for the homelessness spending, for the preschool for all,
Tons.
for the climate things, right? We haven't had the opportunity yet to vote based on competency and to vote based on getting things done, right? And I think it's kind of a weird situation, frankly, to be in a situation where you have the ideals and you have the money and just not the will to get it done. Right?
But haven't we had the opportunity to vote based on competency? And what I mean by that is we don't have to reelect these people. And they seem to get reelected over and over again. And we don't have to reelect the same ilk, right? Like if Deb Kafori chooses her successor, she basically did, and Jessica Vega Peterson, we could have looked around and said, as I did, based on Deb's competency, I'm not too thrilled with anybody she's going to suggest as who should be chair, which is why I just sort of naturally gravitated to Sharon. Don't you think that the re-election of people or the election of people that have not solved the problem, who they're pointing to and saying, you go vote for these people, don't you think the constituents can kind of say, I'm voting on competency. I'm going to ferret out people who I think I'm not ideals schmeals. I'm voting on competency.
Like you've seen this the past 6 to 8 years and you're not down with that. Is that
right. Or just not voting for that person again.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of it is just the fact that some of these positions, right, they've been countywide. And so, when you're thinking about things countywide or citywide, right, with the old city council, you're trying to balance all of these problems across all these different places, right? Like,
although I guess they have bureaus.
Yeah.
So you could say, okay, you're not running your bureau correctly, and I need to elect somebody else. I mean, I think that's what people said when they voted out Joanne Hardesty. I think they were like, look, the firefighters are in distress and they're in crisis, and we got to have somebody else taking care of that bureau.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is just the fact that we haven't had this, it hasn't been so stark, right? Like, I totally understand people who will point to the way that Burnside was in 1995 and say, well, things aren't that different, right?
Yeah, but that was just Burnside, and it was not fentanyl, and it was not the deaths, and it was not. Yeah, you're saying you understand based on like a photograph, which is usually what they do.
Sure.
They'll put up a photograph on Twitter or something, and they'll say, hey, look, we still have homeless people. No big deal. It's just the same issue, and everybody has homeless people, and we just deal with it. And Daniel, you're saying it's deeper than the photograph.
Yeah, and it's
and we're all the majority of Portlanders are feeling this.
Yeah, it's not at all the same, right? If everyone who is on fentanyl today was just on heroin, we would be in a much better place.
That's exactly right.
Drastically
And
different.
we went through that in the 90s, and we saw that.
And it was bad, but it was not how it is today, right?
And frankly, we saw that with crack, and that was also bad, but it was not how it is today.
But I mean, back then we also had a detox center. We had
That's exactly right.
So
more infrastructure for things like detox and rehab.
Yeah. Like, and I mean, we had a smaller population.
Yes, we
right?
did. Much smaller.
Like 13th Street downtown was gravel, even through like the mid 90s, right? Like, Portland is a big city now. Like, we have big city problems.
Are you a native?
I grew up here, in far southwest, over by the Mormon Temple.
Yeah,
Like
that's where I
75.
grew up too.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah,
It's
that's like
nice.
the best kept. Well, I'm about to spill it. That is the best kept secret in the Portland metro area. It's like a Tigard zip code, Lake Oswego school district, Portland address. It's like a lower. I mean, I grew up lower. I grew up lower
trifecta.
middle class, but it's
Yeah.
like it is. I don't know. I'm not saying you did, but you're much younger than I am. When I was growing up there, it was a lower middle class neighborhood, but it was a way to get in, and it was, we were just right off I-5, but it was a way to get into a good school district
Yeah.
and be around a whole bunch of families and bikeable streets and things like that.
And you're probably still close to downtown enough to where you could come into town and
Totally.
whatnot. It's interesting though that you were saying that, because you're making me think, like, when you're making those phone calls now
Yeah.
to like people to get you to vote for you, like basically everyone I have on this show, obviously I'm selecting my guests, but I'm guessing when you make those phone calls, the same thing. I just hear the same livability thing from everybody. And is that kind of what you're getting at of like, it's not just because downtown of any city is always going to have those problems in my opinion. But what I hear more is like, hey, I'm out in Southeast, I'm in Northeast, and these problems are literally right outside people's homes.
Or
I'm guessing
in their home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's kind of what you're hearing sometimes, or maybe a lot of the time when you call people and talk to them about it.
Yeah. People just will say, you know, I want to feel safe walking my dog, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm not going to say, oh yeah, you actually are safe statistically versus the, you know, violence rate in the 90s or something, right? I'm not going to be that person, which I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah, right. Because people should just feel safe, right? I mean, regardless of whether they are, people should feel safe.
Thank you. Yes.
And having had that conversation with a lot of people, it's something that's borne out in the statistics too, right? I mean, the city of Portland did a big survey last year that showed that only 40% of people feel safe walking in their neighborhood alone at night.
Wow.
I saw that. I allegedly live in a nice neighborhood. That applies to me and my adult female friends too, and frankly, some of my adult male friends.
Yeah. But the thing that I thought was really kind of interesting about that is that you go and look at a similar survey they did in 2012, and it was 60% felt safe at night.
I totally did. I walked everywhere. Yeah,
right?
no issues.
Yeah, and like Daniel and I were talking before the show, like I used to live downtown, not in Old Town, but near. This is I don't know. Some people call it Psycho Safeway on 10th, but I used to live.
I did too.
I used to live right by there.
The scary. Everybody has the scary Safeway, but yes, Southwest 10th by the Art Museum.
Yeah, and I would walk to West Burnside, all over Goose Hollow. I'd go to bars. I'd come home. I didn't have a car, and I would feel fine. But I was just thinking that's where your friend, the nurse, I believe, was attacked by the
radiologist. Yeah, was attacked. Yes, was assaulted badly, very badly.
Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so it's just different because
I
remember walking through those areas for years without feeling anything.
And she was with a male companion.
And she had a friend there.
And it was a weekend night. It was not 3 a.m, and they were just walking down the street.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you decide who to call, Daniel? Do you just have a list of residents? You just go down one by one?
Yeah, I've got a big list that my team figures out for me. I just call them, which is like...
That's amazing. No one does this.
I mean, I hope the other candidates are doing it.
No,
right?
they're not. I'm not getting phone calls from their candidates. So if you get a voicemail, do you leave a message? And do you say, hey, if you have concerns, you want to talk to me, call me back at this number or anything?
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
I think
Have you ever gotten that?
Well, I'm curious, like, how do you see that? Are you getting, like,
I love that.
the effectiveness you want out of that? Because I don't know how people would even... Like, for what I do for my day job, people still try, like, mailers for, this is, like, mortgages. But
yeah,
I'm just curious as a marketing...
Oh, no, candidates are doing...
As a marketing
that's what
tool.
they do too.
I know, they'll do mailers up until election day.
I find it ineffective.
But I'm just curious, like, is that you found the most success and you kind of like that the best as far as outreach and...
Yeah, I mean, especially in this early stage, right? We have a mail firm signed on to do that eventually, right? We have a TV firm. But right now... just the most important thing for us is getting 250 donors from Portland.
Right, so that you can get the small donor matching.
Yes, which is huge.
It is huge.
And
people don't understand.
Listening to Daniel and you like what he's saying, please donate to him.
Yes.
I'm just going to say that right now.
I really appreciate that. The website's DeMelo for Portland.com. Also, that's what it is on all the Twitters and Instagrams and everything, right? Getting to that 250 is so huge. I understand we're the second most donations in the race right now, which I did not expect to be that person, but it feels pretty good.
Who's the first?
Angelita, but
are you serious?
She's got the TikTok, which I commend her for. I wish I had that kind of experience with video.
No, I see. Yeah. Well, Andy could probably, I don't know, give you some tips.
I'm like, I missed I'm too old for TikTok, but I can help you with other video stuff if you want. Yeah.
You are? Or you feel like you're too old
for
TikTok?
I've made some.
Yeah, really what I need to do is just lend you my 10-year-old and my 12-year-old
exactly.
who are frankly brilliant at it.
Because that's what, I don't get the whole, how stuff trends on there and all that.
I got it.
But yeah, like I agree with you, like more power to her. She's leveraging that.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. And then how did you decide to do, well, okay, first of all, are you getting a lot of people picking up? Because everybody I know has their phone on silent all the time.
Yeah. We get maybe, what was that? Almost 30% pickup, which
I
is
think
huge.
that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That I from what I'm told, it's about double.
And
the
it's a
usual
lot
rate.
more efficient than canvassing. And I bet if you were, I like face to face. I love phone call. I'm a Gen Xer, so I love phone calls. I love face to face more, but the calories needed to do the canvassing, and it's not just by you, obviously. It would be by a whole team, and then you need the literature and all the stuff. And I'm sure you will do that. But it seems like the amount of people that you're going to reach, because we've got the same phenomenon these days going on where the door knocks, nobody cares to answer it because nobody got a text about anybody interesting coming over, or they see, oh, I don't know, it's a guy with some stuff in his hand. He's probably trying to sell me something, I'm not going to open the door. I feel like the engagement would be the same. I think what you're doing is really smart with these calls.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it's smart. Like I
It
think it's
is
working,
because
yeah.
you're talking to people.
And I've done door-to-door canvassing before. I did that for Osberg here, and it
The
is
OSPIRG,
Yeah.
the Ralph Nader organization. Yeah.
yeah. And something that I want to tell anyone who's listening is that one of the kindest things you can do for someone doing door-to-door canvassing is slam the door in their face. It feels really unnatural, but actually the worst possible person is someone you'll talk to for 10 minutes who are just like, oh, I'll hear this person out. That's a nice thing, but I'm never going to donate.
Right.
Like,
Just
no.
waste your time.
Yeah, just slam the door in the face. You're actually doing someone a favor.
That's
It's really
good
weird.
advice. Okay. It will feel odd, but I'll try to remember that.
It's being decisive. Is what
yeah. Because, I mean, it's the
Well,
same
it doesn't
thing.
waste your time
Yeah. I mean,
or
it's-
theirs.
no, yeah. I mean, it's the same thing with a phone call. If a number is wrong, then I move on. It's great. I just hit the button, keep going.
I heard from a comedian once, this is kind of a gross word, but for telemarketing, they call those people strokers because they're not going to spend any money and they'll just waste people's time. But can I go into this little lightning round thing real quick? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just checking the time. Quick. Okay. All right. So we talked a lot about livability, fentanyl. I'm curious how you feel about 110, because right now there's this whole thing of like repair or repeal. I've heard from people on either side of that argument, and I'm curious how you feel about that.
Yeah. As you might imagine, I've talked to a lot of people about 110. I feel like as someone who voted for it, right, it's the situation where I think people thought they were getting two things out of it, right? And we got one of them, the decriminalization. We didn't get the funding for the actual treatment facilities and so on, right?
And what do you define treatment to be?
I mean, at a minimum, I think we need obviously just regular rehab facilities, right? I understand it's a 3 to 4 month wait if you're on OHP in Portland to get into a rehab facility. And I've had friends who've had their issues with substance abuse disorder. And I know that when someone's at bottom and they're like, oh yeah, bring me to the facility.
You have to go right away.
Yeah, you've got 8 hours, right?
Yeah. Well,
If that.
Yeah.
I would feel like telling any kind of addict like that 3 or 4 months is basically like, good luck. Like, like it's kind of like
Go get high. Go get high again. Hope you survive the next. And they're not. They may never come back for that chance.
Yeah. I mean, frankly,
For a lot of reasons.
We're like 48th, 47th for mental health care in the country.
We might be
states,
the worst. Actually.
Which is terrible. It's also a huge opportunity. That means we have like 50 states.
I love
we
how
can
positive
copy.
you are.
Well, it's
No, you're right. You're right. Why reinvent the wheel? Look at what the number one is doing. So I'm assuming you did that.
No, but it's something
But you will.
I'm planning to. Yeah. And I think that, right now, obviously, the county is supposed to be in charge of the mental health care system here.
Supposed to be.
Supposed to be. Something I really, really want to see happen is when the county or anyone isn't following through on their promises to Portlanders, I want to see the city step up more. I want to see the city be like the champion of Portlanders more often.
In what way? Like doing things like Mingus Maps did and like just not giving them the money is one example. And what else can people do?
I mean, I think not giving the money to things that don't work, using the bully pulpit, saying this is not acceptable, change it. Being involved at the legislature and saying these are the things that Portlanders need. These are the things that Portlanders want. And then, frankly, in the long run, the city has the opportunity to consolidate the county.
Say more about that.
So the voters back in the 70s passed something that would allow for the city of Portland and the government of Multnomah County to be merged. There's a bunch of particulars in it, but the city council can initiate the process. And it's not something that I think, we should be like thinking about doing right away right now or anything, right? But the option's out there. I would love to see the conversation happen about it, because if this current system isn't working of having the county take care of some urban services and a bunch of rural services, and the city takes care of some urban services, then it's not outside of the realm of possibility. And if there needs to just not be a Multnomah County for
This is so interesting. Wait, are you telling me that there is the ability for the city to just
become the county?
eliminate the county
Or
altogether?
absorb a lot of that servicing and stuff.
Yeah. So it'd be kind of like the city of San Francisco, or like Brooklyn
Right.
before the consolidation into the New York.
How do you understand? I mean, you seem to know quite a bit about procedure. How does this work? Everybody votes?
If I remember correctly, the city council or the county commission can initiate it, or you need
The commission won't.
you need a petition that's 6% of the number of voters who voted for a governor in the county.
And that'll be really expensive. So really council. So if anybody could get a group together on that, it would be you, I kind of feel like. So you, theoretically, you could sort of lead a charge if you win the city council position to sort of just take over what's going on at the county and just say, you're not managing this and you're finished here for now.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like an immediate goal of mine, but I think it's something that should be in the back of our minds, right?
I think it needs to be on the table.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I was thinking, is it the nuclear option? Like, is it?
I mean, it would be.
But it's an option.
I don't know that it's nuclear. I mean, I wish we had a nuclear option. Not really, but I don't know that it's a nuclear option, but I think it's close. It's very revolutionary.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like the part of the reason it doesn't happen, right, is that then the city would be in charge of those things, right? Like,
they don't want to own it.
Yeah.
Kind of
Because then it means, well, that's why I thought it was so interesting when Tina Kotek started this task force. And I was like, oh, well, okay. I mean, as a non-Tina Kotek voter, I want to see her succeed regardless. Of course I do. And I actually like some of the things that she's saying. But as a non-Tina Kotek voter, I just thought, oh, boy. I mean, if I were her advisor, I'd be like, there's no way you want to touch that thing with a 10-foot pole. Now you're in charge of homelessness and everything, Daniel, that you were saying that stems from that. And it's everything from drugs, addiction, crime, mental health, major out of control, just litter and garbage everywhere. Now suddenly you're in charge of all those things and you've decided you're going to convene some commission to take care of it. It's exactly like you said. I mean, that is the risk. And then suddenly everybody on city council is pretty vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
Unless you can get this done. I mean, I don't know. I feel like somebody like you could.
I understand why, though, because at least the way that I'm listening to you and interpreting it is like, and just what I've seen in the past few years, is like there's a total vacuum of leadership on the city or the county. I mean, there's bright spots here and there, but if one of those two could
kind of powerful leadership is just, it's not there.
Yeah.
And the quote, the leader, the mayor, the chair, these positions have not been occupied by people with any kind of serious ideas or leadership.
Well, especially as far as results, like we've been talking about
in recent history.
So,
yes.
yeah, I can see like why you would think that that's an interesting option. And so the city between those two can kind of grab something by the horns and be like, we're going to do this. Like, there's urgency, there's a need for this, and we got to get something.
Daniel, will that depend on who else is with you on city council and because you seem to be the kind of person, like for instance, in this budget committee, who can kind of you can lead. Like if there were, so I'm a trial lawyer. If I had a jury, you'd be the foreperson. I already know that. You'd be the foreperson. So do you feel like you're the kind of person who could marshal some consensus around something like that and maybe actually get that done? Or do you feel like everything is so wild right now and there's all these districts, you might sit back I'm not saying that this would even be on the table, that you'd mention it, but to the extent that you thought, actually, I think if you decide that this is a possibility, what things would you need to see in place for you to even put that on the table? Like, I'm assuming people you can work with on city council would be a big one, or people who also acknowledge you as a leader.
Yeah, I mean, I think that getting a bunch of pragmatic people onto the city council who are ready to solve the problems is like the most pressing kind of problem when it comes
How
to
will we do
the
that?
system here. I think it's really getting people involved and getting people to understand that when someone says, I want to do X, you have to ask how and why, and like how, what is the expectation, right? Like, I would love to see, for example, when someone says, oh, we're going to, for example, we're going to do all of this rental assistance vouchers, right? To help people, to prevent people from being evicted, right? I want to see, all right, this is going to have this result.
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't have that result, then we're going to try something else, right?
I was thinking you almost need a rule for like when people say we're going to solve X or here's the solution to X, you need to, like you're saying, outline that stuff. And because it's just, I don't know, at least from my perspective, it's like we just have years of no outcomes, nothing trackable, nothing, So I totally get that. Sorry to, you can finish.
Lightning.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so as far as,
This was all my fault.
no,
I
it's
started
okay.
the
It's
lightning
okay.
round.
Because we all
I
love,
turned it into a snail round.
no, we all love talking about this, but as far as, are you kind of, I understand what you're saying about 110. Are you saying let's keep the existing thing and just try to focus on treatment? Is that kind of what you're saying?
I mean, I feel like, something I want to point to is that I really believe that it's like the job of a public servant to do what the public wants, right? You're serving the public, right?
Uh-huh.
When it comes to Measure 110, if people want the legal parameters changed to say like, okay, these substances aren't decriminalized and it's overwhelming, then I'm ready to go in there and do what people want to see.
I think it is. I mean, that Emerson poll says repeal overwhelmingly. I think it was 70% want to repeal.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like at a minimum, I would say, yeah, we should do that for fentanyl and P2P methamphetamine, if not just regular methamphetamine, right? Like, I think people, might look at a bill like this and think, oh, yeah, it's fine if there's someone, doing cocaine or something.
I think it kind of means everything, though, because according to the police and the coroner and the firefighters, fentanyl's in everything. There's no cocaine anymore. Not in Portland. In Portugal, there is. Yeah. Interestingly, they haven't seen fentanyl yet, but in Portland, it's in everything. So suddenly, it almost sort of becomes a repeal at that point. It seems like.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, that's something I would love to see the state legislature do. Either way,
well,
if
I thought that's what you're gonna say. So you want to see some kind of vote?
Of course.
Yeah. I mean,
that's the simplest, is it not?
Yeah, and I think either way, even if you change the law tomorrow, there aren't the resources or the will at the city to totally take on the problem.
That's
right?
exactly right.
Or
Nor the manpower, frankly.
Yeah.
We don't have enough police to even respond to homicides, let alone get down in the weeds about fentanyl testing.
Yeah.
Which is another one of my lightning round. Can we go to that real quick?
Oh, yeah, go. Yeah.
Because I don't know. There's a lot of what I would call anti-police sentiment still. And I'm just curious, do you feel like we're at
Do you think that, Andy? Do you think that there's a lot? I feel like it's loud, but I don't know that there's a lot.
I would say with younger people, it's very...
Do you think so? Like the majority of younger people?
Yeah, and I don't know. And to
be
honest, some of that's warranted, to be honest, but it's also like, it's just the default position that I see with young people is to just like, F police, like we don't need them. But I'm just curious, like, do you think staffing is adequate? Do you feel like we need more money? I know there's a lot of debate around that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, to speak to this question about young people, like
you're young, right? How old are you?
I'm 26.
Yeah. You're young.
Yeah, I would be the youngest counselor elected.
Yes.
So
are you anti-police, Daniel?
No, what I want to point to is, like something I think about a lot. I just recently read this book. There's this history of Multnomah County, partially written by the former auditor. It's a great read, by the way.
Cool,
What's it called?
Multnomah.
Something.
Oh, that's it?
That's it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just Multnomah, and we could just find it on Amazon?
Yeah, I got it from Powell's. Actually got a signed copy. I was excited
that's
about
awesome.
That.
Okay, wonderful.
But, in it, she recounts a story about how in 1926, the the highway in the Columbia River Gorge had opened, and it was this huge tourist attraction because it was this engineering marvel. They'd figured out how to blast through all this basalt and stuff, right? And there's this person at the newly formed sheriff's motorcycle corps, right? Because they had just invented motorcycles. There's this patrolman who goes to the county commission and says, hey, I'm dealing with all these cars that are getting head-on collisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if we painted a line down the middle of the road?
Wow, this is so interesting.
Well,
It really is. It's like I didn't know the etymology of all this.
Is this also coinciding with like the interstates being?
This is before, right? The
Okay,
interstates are maybe like 20, 30 years later,
It's
right?
like ahead of their time.
Yeah. And so he goes to them and he says, well, what if we painted a line down the middle of the road? And they say no. And so he says, screw it. I'm just going to go buy the paint myself and do it myself.
I'm picturing Kramer with the Seinfeld gif. I don't know if
I think it is exactly that. He's on the motorcycle with the paint,
roller,
right?
yeah.
Like he wasn't walking down the road all the way, right?
Yeah.
But that's where lane markings come from.
Mm-hmm.
Is this one sheriff at the Multnomah County Sheriff's Department
Fascinating.
97 years ago who decided we should have lane markings down the middle of the road. And I bring that up is obviously that's a very different situation than urban policing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very
Sure.
different situation in terms of the oversight, right? Like today, if a officer decided to go paint 30 miles of road, it'd be kind of a scandal.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, it was actually this huge benefit, right?
Right. This guy's suddenly a hero, right?
Yeah. And I mean, as far as I know, there's no like statue for him or anything. I feel like there should be because that's
There
kinda
should
cool.
be.
Maybe like a paint
It'd get
roller.
torn down immediately, but there should be.
We're coming up on the 100th anniversary. You know, if there's one thing we could do, that'd be cool. I feel like that'd be cool. But what I feel like in terms of the policing here, right, is that if you talk to the officers, they'll say, yeah, we hate showing up 30 minutes late for everything. And if you talk to people who are victims of crimes, they'll say, yeah, we hate that they show up 30 minutes late for everything, right?
Yes.
I think that part of the reason we're having that is because it's a hammer and not everything's a nail, right? I would love to see kind of some variation, right? But also I think that the police have they're right to complain about understaffing. I mean, I understand we're 48 or
48
49.
out of 48 or 49, depending on the day. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think we might be 49 now just because of the attrition that there's sort of become this avalanche of attrition in just even like the last few, I don't know, months.
Yeah. And I think that that might not solve this problem immediately of people, not showing up on time, right? Because I think part of the reason that we're having such a problem with organized crime here in Portland is that those officers, they don't have the time to go and do that CSI Law and Order stuff where they're actually like doing the investigations, right? All they can do is be reactive. And so as a result, anyone...
But isn't a lot of that FBI? I mean, if it's organized crime, a lot of it's probably over state lines and et cetera.
Yeah, they should be stepping in, I think, a little more. But they need the little bits of evidence gathering and so on from local PD, right?
Sure. Totally. They've got to be system partners. And like you said, how do you be a system partner in something that serious and emergent when you're just doing the queue and responding to homicide after homicide to fentanyl overdose? And
Yeah. And I think that's part of it too, right? Is like they're having to just respond to those things that aren't really nails, to use the analogy, right? I think that, the Portland Street response is a step in the right direction. I think it's a little weird as an organization, but that comes from the old commissioner system, right? They had to come up with a way to call an emergency department a street response, right? They had to figure out how to put it in the bureau, or Joanne Hardesty did. But I think having kind of a variety of options makes sense, right? Like today, you could imagine a system in the United States where we had decided that police and firefighters are the same thing, right? Like you call 911 and that the person who just responds to emergencies shows up ready to fight the fire or to shoot the bad guy. But we decided, firefighters and police are distinct things. I can understand in the long run wanting to say, all right, there's a couple things that police have right now that might be separated in the same way that firefighters, respond. Sorry.
Oh, no, please. I was interrupting you. That was rude. Go ahead.
Firefighters today, 90% of the calls are for medical response and not fires. I can understand, maybe all the fire departments should have an ambulance that they can drive instead of a fire truck to every call, right? It's a similar thing. I would love to see just like an understanding of there's all these jobs, and if it's not politically tenable to say, all right, we're going to just up the police funding to cover all those roles, then maybe they should be split off so we can understand them distinctly, right?
I actually think what you just said about ambulances is absolutely freaking brilliant because, as you know, because you're on this county budget committee, we have this enormous ambulance crisis. And if we could create a system of, say, ambulances, like, let's just be realistic. We can talk about the root of the problem. Daniel, I think you have some good ideas about getting to that root, detox and rehab, et cetera. And a lot of this, the legislature's got to take a hold of. And I don't, in my opinion, think they're capable of it, but I certainly wish them, pray for them and for the best. But in the meantime, we got to grapple with reality. And I think it's really brilliant what you just said. Like, why not just have a freaking ambulance fleet of medics literally trained to deal with nothing but overdoses? And if we could do that, think of the calls we could free up.
Oh, yeah.
For police, for fire, for various emergency services, for Portland Street Response too.
Yeah, I mean, the ambulance situation here is so frustrating. I feel like it's emblematic of the problems that we're having in so many other places, right?
$1,000,000,000.
Which is, American Medical Response as the contract with the county for the ambulances, right? That's a core city, county, local government function, ambulances, right? I understand it's privatized in a lot of the U.S., but we're in this situation where they aren't directly responsive to asks from local government, and we just fine them. I'm glad that we're fining them because they're not following through on it. But if we have that direct oversight,
That's exactly right. And that's my issue with all these nonprofits.
Yeah.
There's no oversight. And then you can't FOIA any of this stuff because it's a nonprofit. And they'll just respond by saying, or their C forum or whatever will just respond by saying, well, we're not a public entity. And it's like, but in effect, you are. You get all the public money, just like AMR.
Yeah. I mean,
you are hitting the nail on the head here.
That's
why there's no accountability and there's no ability to FOIA and make this all transparent.
And I feel like I get very frustrated when people dress it up as if it's like the more, progressive response. I say, no, it's privatized. Like, you call it a nonprofit.
It's the antithesis of progress.
Yeah. I mean, just back in August, I was visiting family down in California because my grandpa immigrated here from Portugal. He's got 9 siblings. And so I have 53 cousins on that side of the family, and half of them are named Mary or Paul. And so I'm talking to my cousin
Catholic.
Paul. Yeah. I never really met the guy before. It turns out he runs the city of San Jose's homelessness response.
Interesting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And what he's telling me is that, they have 8 therapists on city payroll who just go to camps and do sessions. Not laundered through a nonprofit, just directly on the city payroll.
And and so then they can look at what the therapist is doing, and the therapist has direct accountability for this public money that's going to them.
Yeah, and they can, it's not like
they can be fired. There's a boss. There's a paper trail.
Yeah, and it's not like the therapist hands the notes over to the city, right? It's really just about establishing that trust with the person, right? Because the idea is hopefully
collecting data and
yeah. But one kind of thing in particular that stood out to me is that he was telling me that he's talking with staff and they're looking at helping people who live in RVs dump sewage, right? It's this basic problem.
Yeah,
and
but it is a problem.
It is a problem. Yeah. I mean, when I was in Old Town, you just see RVs parked in the street, just going right into the drain that goes to the river.
Like Christmas Vacation.
I was just thinking, it's like Uncle Eddie.
Yeah.
Like 5,000 of them.
And so, they're sitting with staff, and so they do the RFPs, the request for proposal, to get bids from contractors and providers to do these dumps. And so the bids come in, and these contractors are saying, well, there's all these different kinds of RVs, and a bunch of people live in really old ones. So we're going to have to retrofit all this equipment, because also there's a problem with like people putting junk in the sewage in the RVs, right? And so on. So it'll come in at like $300, $400, $500 a dump. And so my cousin Paul is sitting there thinking, this doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to go hang out in the garage in the sanitation department for a week and just talk with the guys and see if we can come up with something better. And so he's there 9 to 5, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Finally, Friday, one of the guys comes in and is like, I've got the solution. We're going to, take one pump and put it in a tray and then pump it back out or whatever, right? And so this service that they got bids for $300 to $500. In the end, it ends up costing them $10 a dump, right?
Wow.
And the reason I bring that up is because keeping it in-house meant that not only was there huge savings,
Yes.
right? And those savings, it's not like those savings just went back to taxpayers. It's like, no, they were able to do 30 to 50 times more dumps.
It's more efficient.
More savings, more results.
And keeping it in-house meant that there was the ingenuity, right? Because a private contractor, if they know that $500 is going to represent like a 10%, profit on each dump, they don't have that incentive to bring it down to like.
That's exactly right.
Such a huge, it's really frustrating to see this kind of understanding that, oh no, we need to spread it out amongst all these providers. I mean, the joint office in particular wanted to engage with a number of culturally responsive providers, and that was one of their goals. And I was, asking like, well, what are the results? Like, how does that help more people not be on the street, which is our goal here, right? And there's not really an answer for that. So,
there's no data to even support that or to define what culturally responsive means.
Yeah, I mean, and it really is. It's like when I was.
You're the only one asking these questions.
No, I think that some of the other people on my committee have asked.
Oh, are they? Well,
I hope,
are they following your? They're probably just following your. I mean, not just. They're following your lead, is my guess, which is much appreciated. And I don't want to, elevate you and hurt them, but I'm just saying I can recognize that you're a leader, and they're probably saying, hey, this guy is asking all the questions that we've been dying to. And I don't know why I'm just sitting here quiet. Maybe I'm going to ask them too.
Yeah. I mean, we've had I think a really good experience being critical and asking these questions.
It sounds like it.
And I really feel like.
Can you get these other people to run for city council or something? I'm actually not kidding.
I mean, I would love to, really, any of them. It'd be great to work with them again.
You should ask them to do it, please.
I'll bring it up. I actually have the meeting with
please
them on
bring
Monday.
it up.
But, I think that this problem with the privatization, it's not just about it not having the right results, right? Like, it also is bad for the people doing the work, right? Like, I was in Pioneer Square the other day, and I'm talking with some people who are, they've got the uniforms on for the rapid response. And I'm talking to them, and I'm, telling them I'm running, and I just kind of ask them, like, well, where do you live? Like, what part of Portland are you guys from? And they sheepishly admit they're homeless. And these are the guys who clean up the camps after they get swept, and they are themselves homeless. And
who employs them?
The rapid response.
Okay, right. You said that, yeah. Which is a nonprofit
contracted with the city and the county,
yeah.
Right? Or when I was in Old Town, there was that mitigation site just west of the old Greyhound terminal.
Right.
And
are you talking? You're not talking about the pit. Are you talking about the pit?
No. This
is
the
one by the Greyhound.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was it? It's along the sidewalk, or was along the sidewalk there?
It was in that like lot that's just fenced off now.
Okay.
They used to have the pods there and everything, right?
Was that Right to Dream? Was that one of those?
I can't remember who in particular, right? But
anyway, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mitigation meaning just sort of a makeshift. It wasn't a shelter really at all, but it was like a bunch of pods where people were being warehoused.
Yeah. The staff there started kind of complaining. They were saying, look, we're here to help people get services. We're help people to get housed. We're not here to treat gunshot wounds. And we're not here to deal with the violence and chaos of dealing with Old Town at night.
And cartels. Yeah, right. That's right.
And
exactly right.
They started looking at unionizing. Shut down, gone. To this day, it's an empty lot, right?
Wow.
And
instead of dealing with the problem which they nailed, which is who's going to deal with all of those things so that we can get these people in a position where they can get housed, the whole thing is just swept away.
Yeah. I mean, this privatization, these nonprofits, which it's terrible because there are nonprofits out there that are doing good work. Even nonprofits who get funding from the city and the county.
Not that we would know because we have no metrics, but I'm sure they exist somewhere.
Yeah. It's a bad deal for us as just everyday Portlanders. It's a bad deal for the people doing the work on the ground. And it's a bad deal for homeless people because they're
not getting off the street.
They're not getting off the street. And I mean, one of the most frustrating things about my experience, asking the county these questions was that we had asked them very directly, Like, hey, if we look at your budget and the portion of your budget that's going to shelter beds, it looks like if you cut everything else, you would have enough beds to shelter everyone right now, right? And we're not suggesting you do that because those other things are important. It just looks like you could. Have you considered that? And their response was, the Joint Office of Homeless Services has not conducted this analysis.
Of course they haven't. And according to Sharon, they have so much darn money, they could actually do whatever they want.
Yeah.
Whatever they want. She's like, we're the only county in the U.S. that doesn't have to worry about money. Anything we want to do, we could do it.
Mm-hmm.
But in particular, what really got to me is that a month
That
later...
they hadn't even considered it. But sorry, go ahead. A month later.
A month later, we're looking at their notes. And so we had sent them a list of questions.
How did you get that?
They sent us this document that had assembled all of our questions and the few answers they had to some of the questions.
Okay.
And on that document with the questions, they had included a note next to this question.
An internal note?
Yeah, that said...
that didn't get erased before they sent it to you.
Yeah, that said, should we describe the bottleneck? Should we describe people staying in shelter if we only build shelter?
Wow.
Which is, the right response. It's why we weren't suggesting they do that. But why would they not be upfront about that?
Yeah, it tells you a lot about what's going on there, right?
Why not talk about the real issues?
Yeah, and because that is more than anything else an analysis, right?
And so I'm assuming you brought that up. That was like number one on your next agenda item.
Okay, so in June we had a meeting. This was after the budget cycle, and as a committee we decided, okay, we're going to continue meeting year round. We took a vote on it and everything, right?
This is like the most dedicated volunteer committee I've ever heard of in my life.
It is the most important problem here. I'm hoping that I'm doing it on behalf of people, right? Who can't do this, but we had taken this vote to continue meeting year round. And then 2 days later, we get a note from JOHS saying that they had gotten a letter from Chair Vega Peterson that they interpreted as meaning like, oh, we shouldn't meet in the summer and so on, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't interpret it that way because it didn't spell it out exactly. And so we resolved to just continue meeting.
Okay.
So the county's supposed to assist us. We've gotten mainly radio silence.
They're supposed to assist you in what way?
They're supposed to staff our meetings. They're supposed to send out the notices. They're supposed to.
They're kind of
and they're not doing any of this.
They're doing the hosting basically.
No, yeah, and so
and the publicity. And it's supposed to be complying with the code that they don't know or comply with.
Yeah, and so like I had done in February, when we for the Central Budget Advisory Committee just met at the library. We just have continued to be meeting at the library.
Bad that you have to keep going to the library. But
I love that Daniel's just like, we're just doing this. I know what the code says, and I'm just going to do what's within the parameters. There's nothing you can do to stop me because I'm following the rules.
And we had voted on it. I really believe that we should be accountable to that vote. And so as a result, we're going to continue. If the chair,
I appreciate your principles.
Yeah, if the chair wanted to tell us to not meet, then she could do so directly. But we never
instead of passing some
that.
Allegedly opaque message through the joint office.
Yeah, which I have that letter, and it doesn't say don't meet. It just says the cycle has concluded. But there's nothing in the code about a cycle or anything like that. Yeah. So I am just gonna.
There you go.
Keep. Yeah. Right. Like
I think that's awesome.
But why? Is this?
I love what you're doing. I just love what you're doing. I admire you so much.
I appreciate that. I wish I could.
I know you're so. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, and frankly, it's dry.
I don't know how you're doing it. It's not dry to. Well, I hope it's not dry to anybody out there. It's obviously not dry to us. Like you said, this all comes down to the most important issues that Portlanders are facing, which is homelessness. Yeah, and all the things that stem from that.
Yeah, and I think in the long run, the thing that really kind of terrifies me about this response, right, is aren't we supposed to have like a big earthquake someday, right?
Yes, the Cascadia subduction zone.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, that is gonna.
Rolling Stone did that whole piece on it, and then everybody else sort of followed suit. Like literally every major newspaper, I think its consensus is it will happen.
Mm-hmm. It used to drive me crazy when I worked for the news because I hear about it all the time, and I'm just like, I don't want to think about it. But yeah, it's
It's
on the horizon.
You don't want to be
Yeah.
at the beach
Yeah,
when that happens.
I mean, if we can't handle 6,000 homeless people in
right.
7-8 years,
You're basically gonna
Well,
be
you
dealing
bring
with
up
like
a
a
really good
war
point.
zone sort of environment in that point.
Oh, it won't be sort of.
Yeah.
It's what you're scared of. This sort of Mad Max thing. That's real. I mean, if this thing happens, that's suddenly reality.
yeah. And the reason I bring it up is just to be like, well, in this situation where I'm saying it should be treated like an emergency, right? And I think a lot of people want to say, oh, right, this should be treated like an emergency. This is a crisis.
The majority, for sure.
Yeah. Then how are we going to deal with something that's even more of an emergency and a crisis, right? I mean, New York, right, is getting 1,000 migrants a day.
Right.
So that would just instantly quadruple the number, or not quadruple, it would, increase 25% the number of people on our street, right? How could we deal with that? And
Yeah,
that's New York City. That's not like New York City is like the clean, not corrupt place in the country, right?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up because it drives me crazy of like, I still see this states, cities, government bodies will declare a state of emergency, but I never see the urgency like from that.
Yeah.
Right. It's
Especially
almost-
with homelessness, because it's kind of like, okay, now we're going to deploy our 10-year plan. And it's like, there's no urgency to it, so.
No, yeah. I mean, we built Vanport. I mean, the feds built Vanport,
Yeah.
but the feds built Vanport housing for 40,000 people in 110 days,
Yeah.
right?
It's like it can be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those were not bunks in a warehouse. Those were, little apartments with kitchenettes, but they were apartments with kitchenettes nonetheless, right?
Mhm.
We still own that land. That's still City of Portland land that we could be, housing all these people on. I mean, it's the raceway right now on a golf course. But
Yeah. I was just thinking, I know there's some debate now about PIR and like getting rid of that. And
yeah.
I love cars, but yeah, it's an interesting. It's in it.
You love people more.
Yeah, no, I
Don't you,
mean,
Andy? Don't you, Andy?
I'm not attached to the racetrack and it, but yeah, it's interesting that you brought that up because it is city owned up there and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and we have all these arguments about, oh yeah, we should put 50 people there or 50 people there, and it becomes this whole debate in each neighborhood, right? And
But there's no like head-on focus of just like, let's solve this, let's make a massive effort to.
yeah,
And again, this thing of like that Dan Ryan came up with of these safe rest villages being put into neighborhoods. The reason that was so frustrating to me is, Daniel, as you have consistently pointed out, again, we're not dealing with the root cause of this homelessness. So putting a bunch of severely unmedicated, mentally ill people and people in the throes of severe traumatic drug addiction in with a bunch of families in neighborhoods is not going to solve homelessness, let alone everything stemming from it, crime, cartels, etc. It just brings all of that to those neighborhoods. And so we're just papering over every single root cause issue, and nobody's interested in talking about it except for, it seems, you, which I really appreciate.
I mean, it's like, I understand wanting to figure out where to house these people, right? It's a problem. I will really trust that that's the solution once we have a safe rest village in Laurelhurst. and
Well,
the
how
West
about
Hills.
once we have the infrastructure
Yeah.
to get them in a place where they can be housed, and this idea that we're just going to set up a safe rest village and now they're in it and they're getting services and we're good is silly. If you drive around any of those places, all you see is crime, drug dealing, garbage, detritus. You know where the cartels know exactly where to go. They just go to all the safe rest villages.
Yeah.
They know where to go.
Yeah.
They know who's in there.
Yeah.
This isn't mama working 5 jobs, 12 kids. These are people in the throes of really severe issues that need to be dealt with, that we just refuse to look at.
Yeah. I mean, something, we, on this homelessness committee, we had the opportunity to go and tour the Bybee Lakes Hope Center.
Okay, now
Right.
that's an example of something that works
Yeah. Which I,
really well.
I had heard so many things about it. I was prepared to be very skeptical. But having visited the facility, having talked with the...
Did you talk to Alan? Evans, yeah. Who's fantastic.
He's great. We talked to, I think it was the director of operations, who was a former resident. They had 17.
Was it Patrick?
No, I.
Okay. I think everybody under him are all former residents, is my understanding.
Yeah, and the experience of some of the residents, what they're saying is like, yeah, I was in meth psychosis for years. If I was put in a facility in Old Town, I would be re-traumatized, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had a real understanding of trauma-informed care, and they had the number for the cost per bed right then and there, right? Which was $36 a day for a facility that is probably one of the most comprehensive in the Portland area.
They are. And they will get you, I mean, Alan will say, we triage these people. So you come in, they will figure out what your issues are, and they're multi by the time they get there, of course. It's mental illness, upon addiction, upon major childhood trauma.
Yeah.
I mean, really serious stuff. And somehow they're able to do it. Like you said, at the cost that they're doing it at, and they're equipped to help get these people to a point where they're not only employable, they're employed, and now they're giving back, and they're housed.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it works.
It does work.
The results, I think, speak for themselves, right? Like, if, something I want to be very clear about is I am data driven just because I want the results, right? There's, obviously
why else would you be?
Well, yeah,
Well,
I mean,
I think a lot of people say that now. I don't know if that's what you were gonna, but I hear that a lot. But people don't like follow through with, I don't know, actually wanting that. I think it's just. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Am I making
yeah.
sense? Okay.
I mean, like, it's kind of a different situation, right? But, the main way I get around is biking, right? That's just biking and the bus. That's how I'll be getting to City Hall, is riding my electric bike and taking the bus. I feel safer cycling on a one-way street. Just my own, It just makes me more comfortable, right? From what I understand about the data says that cyclists are more safe on two-way streets, right?
Yeah.
It's just less deaths or whatever it is, right? So when it comes to, well, should I support one-way streets or two-way streets for cyclists? I'm going to go with the two-way streets because that's what the data shows, even though it makes me less comfortable.
Right.
Right.
It's
Like
less,
a person, right.
It's not emotionally driven. It's data driven.
Yeah.
Like a person being afraid of flying in planes, and then you look at the data about plane crashes versus car crashes.
Yeah. Yeah. And, when it comes to how we're dealing with our mental health crisis and how we're dealing with homelessness, right? I think that we're in a situation where we're trying a lot of different things. And because we don't get the data out of them.
We don't even know what we're trying, though, right, Daniel?
Yeah.
Because we don't have that data. We don't know what these people are trying that we're giving money to.
Yeah.
We don't really know what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to just, at a minimum, have one piece of software that says, here's how many beds are available at each shelter, which I understand to this day is not something that's available. It's something that I took a crack at a couple weekends ago, just writing myself. And
Really?
it's not, it's not hard. It's hotel booking software.
Right. That's what Jessie Burke said.
Yeah.
Yeah. She said, I know. Have you talked to Jessie about this?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It was so funny because, Jessie owns a couple hotels. She owns a Society Hotel. You already know this, but just for the viewers. And she's president of the Old Town Community Association still.
I don't know about, she was when I was working with her.
Okay. So anyway, still involved, very involved with the Old Town, of course, because she's invested in that with her business and her customers. But she said she's been telling the city for years, I can do this, no problem. It is hotel booking software.
Yeah.
You're exactly right.
Yeah. And I mean,
and it's simple.
It is simple and right. And it's like,
and you can see it all in real time.
And, you could go and buy the software from a vendor, but if
inexpensively.
If you're doing it open source too, which is an option, if you want it in-house, you could just have a bunch of nerds on the internet write it for you. That's what open source software is nerds on the internet deciding, hey, we should, work on this cause together.
Make it public. Yeah.
Make it public and make it all kind of easy to understand. And
I think there would be takers for that. I mean, Portland makes international headlines because it's a spectacle. Mm-hmm. There are people out there with good hearts who I imagine would be interested in doing something like that.
Yeah. I mean, if there's any high school students listening to this and you want a class project, like make this software.
Seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. Or college students, whatever it is like something that you could put together pretty fast. The fact that we haven't had something like this indicates to me more that a lot of this is just incompetence and a lack of will to get things done, more than something cynical or shady, right? Because this, if it was all about graft, if it was all about patronage, which I think some of it is.
Oh, I think some of it definitely is.
This
Because I
would be
don't
another
understand,
opportunity.
like unwillingness to get things done. I mean, why? Like, what is the? Are you saying that we're just electing unmotivated people?
I mean, I think it's,
Like, don't they want to look good? Don't they want to get reelected?
I think that a lot of the people who are in local government today are people who are thinking about office 20 years from now, right? They're thinking, well, what can I do?
You're saying this is just a step up on up the
Stepping
ladder to
stone.
governor or whatever.
Yeah. And
But
so,
to get there, don't they want to be effective? Wouldn't it be great if they could come up with some of the stuff that you're talking, or do some of the lead, actually? Wouldn't that help them?
I would hope so, right? But really, a lot of it recently has just been, oh no, I'm this person with these values. I'm this person with
I
this
see what you're
personality.
saying. I see what
You
you're
get the
saying.
credential out of it and kind of move on.
Is
Yeah.
that a voter issue? This seems to be a voter issue, which maybe I think is changing. I think the voters are waking up and saying, I'm not voting on ideals anymore. Do you think?
Yeah, I think that, and I think also we have a new election system, right? If you have someone who, if you're wanting to be a values voter, right, you have the opportunity to rank 3 people. You could put your values person first place, put the pragmatic person second, right?
But if you're a values person, you're not going to do that. You're going to put all the values people 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope that people are thinking about this critically and thinking about
I
how do we
think
solve
they're
these problems.
starting to.
Yeah. I mean, having had so many conversations, I've done, more than a couple thousand phone calls in the last couple weeks, right?
Wow.
I think Portlanders are ready to see that happen. And Portlanders are really, really wanting to be involved. I think part of the reason that you don't see very much transparency when it comes to solving these problems is that then when people do get to the ballot box, all they have is the values to vote on, right? Like if I could look at 2 different city council candidates and say, all right, this person put together this policy that reduced homelessness 20%.
You're saying there's a vacuum of leadership and there's a vacuum of candidates who have actually accomplished anything.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it really is because of the lack of transparency.
Yeah, I agree. I was just going to say something like, well, I don't know, like Ted Wheeler's reelection, but then it's like, yeah, he was running against Sarah Yanneron. Like, what choice did we have? And then really, I think this gets to an issue that I appreciate you stepping up and dealing with, which is really what we need is more people who are interested in solving these problems to just run for these positions. So
Yeah.
I appreciate what you're doing so much.
I appreciate that.
I mean, I can see, although I can't imagine, I can't, but I can hear and see, I'm hearing you, and I'm hearing all the work that you're putting into this, and it's not an easy thing to do, and it's a brave thing to do, and it's difficult to say the kinds of things you're saying into a microphone on a camera that's going to go up onto YouTube because nobody else is talking like this.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I really hope that other people are going to step up in this race.
I do too.
I think that, I've had a lot of conversations with other candidates, especially from people not in my district. I think at this point I've donated to 7 or 8 candidates in other districts.
That's smart.
Because
you can see yourself working with them.
Yeah, and it is going to be about all us working together, and there's nowhere else in the world that'll give you a 9-to-1 match on a donation.
Yes.
So-
That's so for people who don't know this, your donation up to a certain point, what is it, $50?
The first $20 gets matched.
Okay. So up to $20 gets matched 9 times. So if you donate $5, public money turns that into like $45. It's just absolutely crazy. It's like you said, it's the only place in the United States like this. I mean, I like it because it means timber scions like Ted Wheeler aren't the only ones running. But on the other hand, in my opinion, 9 is too much, and it's part of why this is costing so much because there will be so much public money that goes to matching. But I you're exactly right. And everybody needs to take advantage of that.
And there's trade-offs too, because it's helping hopefully people like Daniel to in there.
Well, yeah, I mean, it'll help anyone, right? If someone wanted to.
Well, it'll help the issue is it'll help anyone. And what's frustrating as a taxpayer is when you see somebody, you know, who really doesn't represent, I'm a pragmatist like Daniel, who really doesn't represent pragmatism, and they're getting 9 times what, you know, $5, and I'm funding them. Essentially. And I'm happy to fund all these people, just not by 9 times, but it is what it is. And so exactly like you said, people don't understand the power of this.
Yeah. And I mean,
any amount counts. It really does. Anything below $20.
Yeah. And you make a good point about how you're already contributing, right? Like,
we're all contributing.
We're all contributing, right?
A lot of money. Yeah.
And so when you make that donation, you're saying that money you already took from me, give it to these guys, right?
Right.
Because you already handed them the $45,
right.
But handing a candidate $5 means that $45 you already handed off goes to that candidate, right? And so that's part of the reason why I've done these donations, is because there's nowhere else to give me a return.
Yeah, you have to. It's essential.
Yeah.
Can I do the last one of these, which is the DA race?
Okay.
Are you familiar with Nathan Vasquez?
Yes.
And of course, Mike Schmidt. I'm just curious. Have you endorsed one way or the other, or are you feeling one way or the other?
I've not endorsed one way or the other. I really, that race is going to be interesting.
It's an interesting race, yeah.
I don't know what it's going to look like in the end. I would love to have the conversation with Nathan. I'd love to have the conversation with Mike. I mean, either way.
I know Nathan would be happy to talk to you.
Yeah, I really appreciate the chance to have the conversation, because I think Portland needs all the help it can get. I can't really say in particular. I mean, I'm glad, I'm glad that Schmidt can point to the things about, dealing with sentences that maybe didn't make sense. I can understand wanting that to be an interest of the DA's office. In this particular point in time, I don't know about that, right? People have different concerns, right? And again, I really do think that your job as a public servant is to do what the public wants, right? I don't know if what he's doing is what the public wants, but if he gets reelected, obviously it is. And I overall,
the polling says it's not, but sure.
Yeah, no, I know that's
overwhelmingly.
Yeah, and that's a little frustrating. I really do think that it's been very frustrating to see people go in and out of prison here, like fast, right?
Yeah, violent people.
Yeah,
very violent people.
And that at a minimum needs to change. I know that also there's the public defender problem. There's
Yeah, but the DA can't solve that. I mean, They can lead and they can make suggestions. But it's frustrating to me when Mike talks about that over and over again, because he's, I want to just go, Mike, you're not a public defender anymore. Like,
because he's just trying to kind of highlight the issue as opposed to really doing anything about it.
The issue's been highlighted.
Yeah.
We all know. Yeah. He can't do anything about it. He's supposed to prosecute crime. So next, I mean, I don't know. That part's frustrating for me, but I agree with you. I mean, that's something, again, with the gosh darn state legislature. And I mean, this is something not everybody does public defense the way that we do, where we're just, again, with the darn nonprofits, like where we're just contracting it out to all these various people. I don't understand. The weirdest thing to me about being a DA, for the teeny amount of time I was a deputy district attorney, was that
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, it was up in King County, but it's this way everywhere. The weird thing is that your office is in, well, at least at the time ours was, it was in the courthouse, and I just remember thinking it was so odd that the public defenders were not in the courthouse with us. Like, they should be down the hall so that we can negotiate things and prep for trial together and collaborate and trade evidence and whatever. But they're somewhere else. And the DA is like, I get it, they're publicly funded, but so is the public defender. We're all part of the same justice system. And what is so odd to me is that there isn't a counterpart public defender system with PERS, with benefits, with et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that we're just, it's a public system that we're employing people in and keeping that pipeline. It's very difficult to get public defenders or district attorneys in any city right now. But if it were streamlined in that way, again, with this gosh darn nonprofit thing, if we could make these people employees, then we've got a pipeline that we can just go ahead and start filling, as opposed to just holding up our hands and going, I don't know, it's a bunch of nonprofits and there just aren't that many. And I don't really, I mean, it's very frustrating, and we need pay parity.
Yeah.
And obviously that's a way bigger problem than the city, but it is part, it's part of the,
No, I mean, I think it's emblematic, right? I mean,
it is.
Yeah. Like it's so frustrating to see the same problems everywhere, right?
Replicated on every level.
And so, I'm a bit of a history wonk, right? I think a lot about the movements in the early 20th century around reform, right? There's these pushes to just have a civil service, right? Where they're like, yeah, we're going to make sure that jobs don't go based on friendship, based on service to a political machine. We're going to make sure that people are qualified for the jobs they have, right? And so this reform movement, it kicks off in New York City, it goes around the country, it happens here. And as a result, we see less straight up patronage in terms of giving jobs at agencies to people, right? I don't know what's happening to the nonprofits. I don't know if that's what's happening, right? That's the problem, is that we've created this separate arm of government.
That's exactly right.
The rest of the government doesn't get to see.
It effectively is an arm of government. It is all publicly funded.
Yeah. And I mean, there's charities that are just entirely funded.
Yes, there are.
By the government. And I would love to see at a minimum those
charities. Yes.
I would love to see those
way to
charities.
call it, but
They should have to have their board meetings be open to the public, like public agencies. They should have to respond to FOIA requests.
Yes.
It just doesn't make sense to have these entities unless you're trying to save money. And then if you will look at communications around like homelessness, for example, they'll say, oh yeah, we're concerned that providers aren't paying the people doing the work a living wage. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, just employ them and give them a living wage, right? Like, why are you concerned about making sure that your contractors are paying their people living wage? The whole point of contracting is to get something cheaper than you could do yourself, right? That is, from what I understand, the law here in Oregon.
Which is also kind of funny, like the amount that we're handing out to these nonprofits. We're doing the exact opposite of what we should be doing. Like, we're paying all of these entities so much money for what results none of us know. It's you're exactly right. None of it makes any sense. The point of it's almost like we're skirting the point of the whole thing.
Yeah.
We're doing the opposite of what the reason to contract out would be.
Yeah. I mean, it's so frustrating, and it's frustrating because it's a situation that everyone I sit down with says, hey, that doesn't make any sense, right? Because this is one of those few situations where I think anyone, any like stripe politically coming down any part of any aisle, right, can say, hey, this is not, like, it's not leading to the results we want. It needs to change, right? And I want to be that person to make that change, because
hopefully you're a part of that.
yeah. I mean, because it really is going to be this situation. And I think in Portland in particular, right? As a city councilor, as someone running for one of the old commissioner jobs, right? You could say, I'm going to hold the bureaus accountable. I'm going to do that because I'm going to be in charge of them, right? But now we're not in charge of them. All of a sudden, we're not in charge of them, right? And so I think there's a lot of places where this accountability and this transparency needs to be written into the law, and it needs to be done fast.
I agree with you. And is that something you can do once you're on city council? Is that going to be like, I don't know, first 30 days? Is that going to be one of your agenda items?
Is to get more transparency out of all of it. Yeah, because I want to understand it too, right? Like,
well, how else can you grapple with the system that you've just been elected to serve in unless you don't know what the system is doing? I mean, unless you know what the system is doing. If you don't know what it's doing or what's going on, how do you grapple with the issues?
And how are voters supposed to put people into office who understand those issues if they themselves don't get the information about how to understand the issues, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it comes all the way back around. It's not just a problem for people who are in government or people who are interested, right? It's a problem for all of us that we don't get this transparency, because then we are just throwing money into the wind.
Well, and there we go again with values. And like you said, I think it's a vicious cycle of now I'm just going to vote for the person who's talking about climate change because that's something I care about. It's this vicious, we're caught in this vicious cycle of not being able to get anything done.
I was thinking earlier I could see like almost, I don't know if you guys have seen, what's the Mike Judge movie? Idiocracy.
Yeah.
But I could see this future of Portland where like
I
nothing changes in like
think
50
we're here.
years.
That's not the future.
Well, like nothing changes like for 50 or 100 years, but we just keep electing people that don't do anything. Anyway.
That's
I guess
our
that's where we
screenplay.
are, yeah.
That's literally our screenplay.
Can I quickly go through my goofy ending questions?
Yes.
This isn't really goofy, but tell me about your kind of journey here. I'm fascinated you're from Portugal too, because we like to have this whole Portugal model thing.
Yeah.
Talk about that, but I'm just curious, like your time up in Washington State and here and your Northwest story and that kind of
Yeah, I mean, I was born in the States, right? It's just my grandpa had immigrated over here. He was, he grew up in the Azores.
Okay.
So I grew up really poor, like playing soccer with a goat kidney, and worked as.
I didn't even know people did that. That's
Mhm.
wild. Yeah.
Came over in '57, worked in the Carpenters Union down in San Jose, and built houses up in Humboldt and stuff.
Wow.
My mom grew up down there in rural South Oregon for a while, just in poverty that you wouldn't imagine still happens here in the United States. So like she was washing her clothes in the river. And this is like the 70s, right? They had like a party line phone. They had, like straw mats on the floor. It's really intense down there in South Oregon. It's,
Is it still like that?
I mean, I think it's changed. Obviously, the weed money has changed
Yeah.
things down there.
And I can tell you
well,
because
you're right.
I grew up
actually.
down there, but yeah, it is a lot
It's
of
been Californiaized. In
a lot of the
ways,
old
yeah.
timber towns that money dried up and replaced it with weed money.
Okay.
It's interesting, but yeah. I'm sorry. Go keep going. Yeah.
But my experience here I think in Portland has always been with my mom's glasses on, so to speak, because
Okay.
she grew up in this very different world. Portland is the big city. My mom's she's bisexual. She lives with her partner. She came to Portland in the mid 80s. So she's always telling me about all of her friends she had in the gay scene here who are dead because of AIDS,
Right.
right?
It's all AIDS time. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like that's the perspective I've had in Portland, right? Is that it is, if you look on a map of the US, it's like one of the few cities that's got just nothing around it, right? We are the game in town, so to speak. I mean, obviously you've got Eugene and stuff too, but it's not to the same scale.
No, it's very unique.
Yeah. And so I think we have this responsibility, in Portland to solve these problems because we are the place where people can go, right? Something I really believe is that you can't say you're inclusive if you're expensive, right? Like I think about, if you look at like
It seems like every city that says they're inclusive is expensive.
Yeah, I know. And
It's actually a weird. It's correlated, I think, almost perfectly.
That's a good point though, because I think yesterday saw a thing about Seattle affordability. Prices just keep going up.
I mean,
Yeah,
you think
yeah.
about all the cities that say they're inclusive: Seattle, San Francisco, Portland. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
That's a weird paradox, isn't it?
because it really is frustrating because, if you look at statistics, whatever it is, right? What I understand is that 13% of trans people in the United States last year moved because of the laws in their jurisdiction, right?
I believe it. Yeah.
Yeah, Anthony Effinger did an article about that in Willamette Week.
Yeah. I can totally understand if you're a gay person in Tennessee, you're paying $500 a month for your studio. Like, okay, do I want to live somewhere that is $500 a month for a studio, or do I want to live somewhere where the laws support me and my lifestyle, right?
It's an interesting trade-off. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone should make that trade-off, right?
Yeah.
I think you just can't say you're inclusive if you're expensive, right? And we're losing out on so many things because of this cost of living problem. We're losing out on so much
With no results. That's the weirdest part.
yeah.
Like, it's not like we're some European country where once you're 50, you get to retire and you make more than you even did when you were working, and you've got platinum health care and I mean, what to show for?
Yeah. And I mean, it's like in Seattle, like, great. Yeah. Amazon blew up. That everything got expensive. San Francisco, the tech scene, it blew up. Everything got expensive. What did we build here in Portland that made it so expensive?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, we've run all the businesses out. I don't know. I don't understand.
I mean, I guess if you're talking,
there's taxes, obviously.
If you're talking like the Titans, there's still Nike. There's still
they're not in
Intel.
Portland, though.
Intel
I
is
mean,
even,
Beaverton.
I think, moved some
Intel's
of their stuff.
Hillsboro.
Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah.
their stuff is now in Germany. We're not we don't attract captains of industry. And that's a good point.
But the reason it got expensive is not because we built anything. It's because we didn't build anything. We didn't build the housing for people.
I mean, wouldn't they say, though, that that's because of the urban growth boundary and it's allegedly to protect the environment?
Yeah, and I mean, I like that, prevents the sprawl, right? But
And also, my understanding is, I don't know, I've heard this from people at Metro that their argument is that there's an environmental protection component.
yeah, and I
And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the party line.
yeah, I mean, there's this kind of pastoralist environmental stance, right? Which is just like, we need to protect the open fields, and I can understand that when
Waterways, watersheds,
Yeah.
animals.
Yeah, but the most important urban growth boundary is the one above my head, right?
Yeah.
Because if you can't,
Right, you're saying why not just build taller buildings?
yeah, let that happen. The reason that we don't have affordable housing here in Portland is not because of a lack of investment from the city or from the county or from the state. It's because they're getting in the way of it, right? I mean,
Well, and it's also just so gosh darn expensive because they have to pay that fair wage thing, and then and like you said, the people that are getting those bids, it's absolutely incredible, like the price per square foot.
oh yeah,
And I mean, there's got to be a way to control all that. I mean, I know there's some federal stuff that's going on there, and of course some local stuff, but beyond that, there's got to be a way. And then of course there's a permitting process. And I mean, every builder I know says, I'm getting out of here. I can't do this.
yeah. And I mean, even if we're not building public housing, right, and that public housing is coming in too expensive, we should be figuring out how to build it cheaper. Like, even if I wanted to build an ADU in my backyard and didn't hire anyone, which would be stupid. You should hire an electrician and so on, right? Even if I didn't hire anyone, I'm still gonna have to pay $30,000 in the system development charges, right?
That's right.
And those charges, like, you don't just call that a loss. You say, how am I going to make that up with the unit I just built? I'm going to make that up in the rent, and so then the rent is higher because of it, right? Like, there's all these places where we're just getting in the way of private affordable housing development. And if you talk to developers, they'll say, yeah, we want to build affordable housing, but the way that the market is set up, it just only makes sense for us to build luxury housing.
Well, but yeah, and because also the way the city's set up, if you get one of their gigs, it's friggin' sweet and it's very lucrative, but they're only giving it out to so many people. And then what's so interesting, Daniel, is I was at a city council meeting waiting to testify on some issue, and this was brought up, this issue of the inability to build and the permitting problems and all these contractors leaving. And Mayor Wheeler actually had the gall to lecture all of us within City Hall and say, the reason that we have all of this permitting and the reason that it's so expensive is because Portlanders love architecture and they love safety. And you could have cut the tension in that room with a knife. He was telling us what we liked and wanted,
Right.
Using platitudes, which, sound great coming out of his mouth, but in the context of everything, I mean, the rest of us were just sort of looking at each other like, how dare this man lecture us about what we want? We're tired of paying, $5,000 and waiting on some guy who never shows up to do the paperwork to move a toilet 2 feet.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was thinking the ADU thing really speaks to me because I know Portland was sort of on the forefront of that, of finally like, we're going to allow people to do this. But in the end, it's like, if you look on Craigslist, these things are like $1,700 to rent.
Because they can't afford to build the darn thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
or maybe even $2,000. I don't know how much they go for now, but.
No, yeah. I mean, that would be like a price that would make sense if you're
competitive.
if you're having to pay for all this this stuff in the short term, right? Because you're not like, if you have all that cash available to just build something like this, you're a rare person here in Portland.
You are. And then, of course, you've got property taxes on top of that. That's a whole other thing
Yeah.
that are
Yeah.
allegedly
Yeah.
capped. But then there's a bond, and then there's a bond, and then there's a, I mean, it's all, yeah, I mean, you're raising a lot of really important issues.
Yeah. I mean, the ADU thing, it's so frustrating because I understand, what you're talking about in terms of what Wheeler was saying, right? I understand why Portlanders might want to be involved at the architectural stage, at the safety stage, at the environmental stage, right?
Yeah, but any of us who've actually tried to move the toilet 2 feet know this isn't about safety.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing that I just think about, right?
Byzantine garbage.
We've been in a state of housing emergency since 2015.
That's your point again. We're not treating any of this as an emergency.
Right. Like we don't
We're talking about safety and architecture? Like, what?
No, we don't meter fire hydrants. Right? We don't charge the fire department for the water they're using, right? Like, why are we charging people who build housing when we don't have housing, right? It just doesn't make sense.
Especially from a business incentive. I know it's not a business, but
Well,
any kind of incentive.
We have no interest in this city in incentivizing businesses to do anything.
Yeah.
We certainly could. There's a lot we could do.
I mean, we are incentivizing businesses, right? Because if I sat here and I said, look, your job is to make as much money selling hamburgers as possible, right? That's your job. Also, you're only allowed to sell 100 hamburgers a day. What kind of hamburgers are you going to sell?
Select businesses.
Right.
Because everybody who's not in that gig, they're running out of town. They're running to Texas and Florida where they can actually build things.
Yeah. Yeah, because
You've got to be within the favored pool.
I mean, I think too about, right? Like Texas, I understand, has built the most green energy in the last 10 years of any state,
That's my understanding.
Yeah. I don't know.
right? And
You
so
guys would probably know better than me. I don't know.
we should be looking to them really in terms of building green energy, right? No, we're not. But
Yeah, because again, values idea. I mean, the minute you mention that word, somebody's going to start talking about Gary Abbott or something, and then it's
Yeah.
all over. I mean, it's a practicality. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And let's just focus on this one issue and who cares about what their governor that you don't like is doing. Let's focus on like the one thing they're doing right and something that we could replicate.
yeah. And it really, with the housing, because the housing thing is everything, right? Like, I mean, homelessness is everything, but housing is the thing before it, right? Like,
Is that true, or is it like addiction and mental health and et cetera?
I mean, this is a fictional story, right? But I just finished watching The Wire with my partner, right?
That's a great show.
Great show.
Love the show.
Bubs, right? He's a homeless drug addict, but he's always sheltered. He's always able to find somewhere to have a roof over his head. Why? Because there's an oversupply of housing.
Well,
in
no, that's
Baltimore.
true. I mean, in New York also shelters all their drug addicts. I mean, you're right. That's
Yeah.
true. New York and Baltimore have projects and all these addicts are sheltered.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously not great, but it's not like people dying from frostbite here, right? People will say, oh yeah, the projects in New York, the hot water goes out sometimes. And it does go out a concerning amount, and they should be fixing that. You never have hot water in your tent.
But here's the difference, Daniel. We're not allowed, allegedly. Now, I think, there are a lot of legal arguments to be made. I think people are doing that. It's being played out now. Allegedly, we're not allowed to take people off the street and put them in shelter.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's something that we're really grappling with.
Yeah, until we have enough shelter, right? I mean,
Well, there is a legal difference of opinion about whether we need to build enough shelter for literally everyone on the streets and everyone we can anticipate to come here versus who is or would actually accept that shelter. And let's just assume, Daniel, though, like you said, I mean, the fact is, if we really wanted to, we could do it.
Yeah.
We could scrap all this stuff if we really wanted to. We could build the same kind of buildings they have in New York City and Baltimore. We could do it very cost efficiently, and we could solve that problem, and we wouldn't have to fight within the Ninth Circuit about whether we have enough shelter beds. We could just be done with it. Put up a bunch of high rises. Now we're finished. Now we've got it. Okay, we're moving them in. We're finished. They're off the street. You can't do that. You got to be in here.
Yeah.
And now you're done.
Yeah. Like I think it's something that we should be, considering, right?
Nobody's talking about that
Well, I was
except
thinking,
you.
like, you can't even get past the step one of getting like the shelter bed cost, which would be a great step one.
Well, that's what Daniel tried to get. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. But like, even, beyond this thing that's just that, right? Like, if we just built a couple of these towers, which it really is just a couple towers worth of
No,
people,
I know.
right?
Yeah.
That would deal with it. Obviously, we still have a problem with the housing shortage here in Portland overall, right?
Which is also a national
Which
housing shortage.
And I think a lot of that is the city getting in the way of these affordable housing projects because, it's not as if businesses don't want to be McDonald's, right? McDonald's sells a whole bunch of cheap hamburgers. They're not so cheap anymore, but they know there's a market for it, and businesses, anytime there's a market, they want to go and serve it, right? Developers, they want to be able to provide affordable housing. They know there's a market for it.
They're going to the states where they can do that.
Yeah, and they can't do it here.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And these charges that we put in the way of housing, like, I understand why you have them, right? But you don't have them during the emergency.
Right.
Like, I understand why you want design review as a city, right? You don't do it during the emergency.
When it's accelerating the problem.
Yeah. Like, if we built a whole bunch of ugly housing and everyone was housed, then we have a bunch of ugly housing and we can fix that later, right? Making housing look better is an easier problem than getting people off the street. Let's get people housed first. I'm not saying like I'm a housing first person, but there are people out there who that is what they need first.
Oh yeah. Oh no, of course there are. And they're waiting waiting on lists. And that is mama working 5 jobs, and they're on long lists, and it takes a long time, or they're in an RV in their friend's driveway somewhere, or they're in a basement. It's exactly right.
Yeah. And I think that the city needs to understand that this is something that just needs to be solved. It needs to be like the thing that we're thinking about, right? Like, I want to be clear, like, if you come and visit me in my office at City Hall in 2 years, you're going to see a big counter on the board that's the number of people who are homeless, and we're going to get that down to 0 or functionally 0, right? There's always going to be someone.
How are you going to do that, though? Because you have to have all these other people, like so many other people working with you to do that. And then don't you also have to sort of take control of what's going on with the county?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I want to see the city step to the county when it comes to this problem.
I agree.
Because it's hurting Portlanders. Portlanders
Yes,
fund
it
the
is.
county predominantly. And the money's being wasted. And even worse than the money being wasted, actually, we just don't know where the money's going.
Yes. Well,
if it was wasted, if I knew it was being wasted, that would actually be great.
actually, we'd know.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
And then we could call them on it.
Yeah, but it's like,
But it's worse. It is worse because we don't know. We don't know anything. And then they could just throw their hands up and say, we're going to bring some people in to talk about what we did do with it, but there's not going to be any metrics or numbers. And everybody says goodbye, and here's another $1 billion check.
Yeah. I think when it comes to solving this problem, people are always like, oh, we need to get everyone at the table. We need to get like these conversations going. We need to get everyone aligned. We don't
have time for that.
I think results speak for themselves. And if you think that there's a way to solve this homelessness crisis, then let's try it. Let's look at the results. And if it's better than the previous thing, then we'll do more of that. Right? I mean, I think that in some ways, the real problem in Portland is just a lack of iteration and a lack of following up on experiments, right?
Right. We want to do the exotic thing.
Yeah. And I would love
We want to reinvent everything under the sun. We're interested in reinventing.
I mean, I think reinventing things is great.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking you brought up some good innovation and stuff like that today, just in our conversation. That
Yeah.
it's exciting, but I also like, you know, attaching
Yeah, but
your
what he's-
transparency and results to it.
And also what he's saying is start with what works. If you go down the list and there's nobody's tried anything, then that's when you innovate.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't just scrap the police and then wait for something beautiful to arise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you should make, we should be running experiments, seeing what works, and then doing more of what works, right? Like, I think
And immediately getting rid of what doesn't, right? I mean, not just like waiting 50 to 100 years.
No, yeah. I mean, I think that I love the maverick spirit of Portland, right? We should be the place to try out new things. I mean, where you put like light rail on the map in this country, right? We used to be the biking capital of America, right? We tried all these things and we saw what worked and we did it. And now sometimes we try new things and we have no idea if it's working, right? I mean, there's just so many places where we don't follow through on it. Like, in particular, something I want to point to, right, is the pedestrian deaths, the biking deaths, the traffic deaths, right? That's a really simple one to understand because it's just a count of people who are dead, right? In 2015, when the city signed on to Vision Zero, which if you're not familiar means that the city as a goal wants to reduce traffic deaths to zero, right? They said they wanted to do it by 2025. Immediately, the goal was zero. They're like, yeah, sure, 2016, we can get that to zero. If you go look at the budget, it'll say zero. That's their goal, right? They don't say it's their goal anymore, but their stated goal is zero every year. That they're somehow just going to drop down to that, right?
Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, it's been ticking up.
Yeah, it's doubled since then, right? Yeah. So obviously what they're trying isn't working. And because they couldn't say, all right, this year, we're going to do this in 10 years. There's 35 deaths. That means we need to reduce the number of deaths every year by 5. And if we start approaching a number that's higher than that, then we need to intervene, right? They just said, no, it's zero. And then we're going to keep dealing with this. We're going to keep just hacking away at the problem instead of saying, oh, yeah, no, this is like objectively a failure against our objectives. And that's...
I was just gonna. I see the signs all around. I've seen them for years, and I've always been basically an opponent of that because I feel like when you come at a problem that big with such a impossible goal of zero, I know it's there's merit to that idea, but it's like, I mean, there's millions of people here. You're gonna have traffic fatalities and what. But anyway, I just wanted to say that I've always kind of been against that. From the name and the intention of the program, especially with what you're saying, is they just watch deaths increase while they're, not changing anything. And
I mean, there are like urban places in the country that have done this. It's like Hoboken, Jersey City, very few traffic deaths in the last 2 years.
But why would we look at what they're doing when we can do an exotic thing that sounds great?
Right. That's the problem. And, I agree that zero is a lofty goal, right? And that's why you pick a date that's far away and you say, all right, we're going to get there linearly. We're going to get there exponentially. Like, you're going to, get there, right? Like, I think that, Portland, it is a city of these progressive values. The root of progressive is progress. You have to make these steps towards your destination. You don't just jump there.
That's exactly right.
Like, and it's...
Where is the progress?
Yeah. Which I think that's something we can all get behind, because even if we disagree about what should be done, one of those things, hopefully, is going to make progress, and we'll do more of that, right? Like, I really think that no matter what you think needs to be done with the homeless crisis here in Portland, you think that it's going to work, right? Like, I hope that every person who wants to deal with our homelessness crisis says, no, what I think needs to be done is actually going to be the thing that gets the most people off the streets. Right. I
think the serious people, I think some of the most vocal people, it's more of an issue of, this is pretty mainstream, the ACLU. I think a lot of it is frankly just about the autonomy of the homeless person or the drug addicted person or the mentally ill person to be mentally ill or drug addicted and to do what they want.
Yeah.
And that's an issue that we have to grapple with, because that is an outsized voice in this city that I think, in my opinion, impedes the progress of getting people off the streets. As a family member of homeless people, immediate family, it's very upsetting to hear. I understand the argument about that autonomy, and we can debate that philosophy all we want, but that's part of the issue, I think, is that I don't know that everybody does want people off the streets.
Yeah, or you're saying
Yeah.
there's people in Portland who are looking around in their neighborhood or downtown river and saying, I don't see a problem with
Of course there are, but I don't think it's the majority.
Yeah.
But I do think that there are I mean, I used to donate to the ACLU. I used to think it was a really incredible organization. Suddenly they've gotten on board with this idea of the autonomy of living in a gutter and being addicted to fentanyl, even though most people who understand addiction will tell you that what goes along with it is a lack of insight or the inability to, not 100%, but many people don't have the ability to look at what's going on and say, hey, I should just go check myself into detox today. And like Daniel pointed out, we don't have the detox for them to check themselves into anyway.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, so we do have to grapple, I think, with that cultural influence. And that may be difficult for you in City Hall to do.
No, yeah, that's something that will have to be figured out.
It's a cultural thing, and maybe you can change it. I mean, because cultures change all the time. The culture of cities changes all the time, and maybe that's something that you can help do.
I mean, the thing I think about, my partner's a teacher, right? Something I really respect about my partner is how direct they are with kids, right? Because a kid is someone who obviously we don't let them make all the decisions for themselves, right? Nobody is fighting for the right for the children of Portland to sleep in the gutter, right? Because we're saying they are not at this place where they have the mental capacity to make decisions for themselves, right? I don't think it's so out of the realm of possibility to say that, someone who is that addicted to fentanyl or methamphetamine, someone who is undergoing psychosis, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility to say, yeah, that person, is kind of more like a child in this situation. We have an obligation, not just a right, but an obligation to take care of that person so that they can address these problems in their life, right? Because
I love what you just said.
Especially if you ever look at this is I think even before fentanyl, but there was this, I believe there were studies, but there were articles about how there's this crossover of meth users and schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Long-term use.
Sure.
And so I see what you're saying of somebody like that, their state of mind may not be the same as any given adult.
Of course that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, the ACLU has all sorts of arguments to combat that, and people with that philosophy have their arguments, but I'm completely aligned with you, Daniel, and I think there are these two competing philosophies going on in the city of Portland, and a lot of it is about shifting that culture. And I think, I think you can do things like Marshall. One thing I've noticed is while there may be former addicts that are part of that culture of autonomy and just sort of leave the drug user alone, leave the mentally ill person alone, most family members, you will be hard pressed to find a family member of a drug addict or a very mentally ill person who will say, no, please allow my father or my sister or my daughter to continue to sleep in the gutter. And I think you can marshal all those family members behind you to assist in that cultural change.
Yeah. I mean, what I think about, right, is there's places in the state of Oregon where dispersed camping is totally legal, right? Frankly, if you want to go up to the woods up around Mount Hood and smoke methamphetamine in your campsite out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, but then you don't have anybody to victimize it, to sell things and then get money for and then get your drugs.
Right.
And there's no cartels.
I mean, I think that's what it comes down, right? If you are someone who is mentally capable of participating in society, we live in a society, right? If you are able to understand the rules as a society that we've put together, right? It's not as if laws were imposed on us. No, this is a democracy. We all chose to have these laws, right? if you're someone who's capable of understanding that and you're choosing not to do it, then you need to be held accountable like any other person, right?
It's a social contract is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you can't understand that, then we have an obligation to help you.
I agree with you. I think their argument is in Portland, we've decided not to impose those rules. And so in our democracy, we've decided that there are rights, that there is this category of to whom everything is given and nothing is required. And we would like to keep it that way. And it has been that way for some time now. And I think your argument, which is very persuasive, is that's not working.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, maybe the situation, maybe the services we have now would have gotten rid of homelessness if they were still, articles complaining about winos on Burnside, right? But
30 years ago. Or
yeah. Like go look at, it's fun to go look at the Oregonian archive and see, oh yeah, they're complaining about, the ban on fortified wine sales in Old Town, right? Like it feels so quaint. Yeah.
Perfect.
Like it really is a different
it's
scenario.
Practically twee. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if you'll talk to providers, they'll say that homeless people will come to them and say, do you know where we can get heroin?
Right.
Instead of fentanyl, and they'll say no because nobody sells heroin anymore. There's not money for it, because heroin is like $10 a pop and a blue is like 50
And heroin has fentanyl in it. So
Yeah.
again, we still can't help you.
Yeah, I mean, what I really think in the long run, those kind of questions about what's legally possible, that's going to get handled at the state, at the federal level, right? What I think about in particular, though, on that front, are these two rulings from the Supreme Court of New York and the Supreme Court of New Jersey, right? So in the early 70s, the New York Supreme Court ruled that they found this in their state constitution, that people in New York have a right to shelter, right? And just shelter.
Sure.
That's why New York City, 96% of their homeless people are in shelters, right?
Well, and they're able to, I not enforce that right, but they also created laws supporting that right that said you must be in shelter, and then they can enforce it.
Yeah, and I mean, the last 4% of people you see on the street are some of the more mentally ill people that they couldn't get in there, right? And so as a result, the problem
or that are
worse.
just constantly, they just can't keep them in.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason why they're having such a hard time with the migrant crisis, is because this law says you have to shelter everyone, and so they have to make cuts to other departments before they make cuts to shelters, right? Just because of the Supreme Court ruling. Around the same time in New Jersey, they had a similar case. And there, the Supreme Court ruled that not only do you have a right to shelter, but you have a right to housing. And what that means in effect is that local governments have to provide a variety of housing types and a variety of affordability options for housing, right? And, New Jersey, it's got its issues in practice. It doesn't happen as much. There's a lot of money being thrown around, right? But if you go to suburbs in New Jersey, you have single family house apartment building because of this right to housing. And as a result, 5 out of 6 of the units built around New York City in the last 20 years were in New Jersey, because that's where they were allowed to build housing. That's where you were allowed to build affordable housing. And as a result, the homeless situation over there is very different, because there's still apartments that are affordable at a living wage there in New Jersey. And obviously it's not happening as much in New York, but
yeah. And they also have infrastructure, and they also have, detox and rehab, and they haven't decriminalized drugs like fentanyl. And I mean, I like what you're saying. I mean, I think we need to use these kinds of places as models and look at what they're doing that is different than us, and use their results and say, this is what works.
Yeah. I mean, it really is a situation where I feel like we've gotten the worst of every option here.
I absolutely agree with you.
Right? Like, for the courts to say that, you have I totally understand why courts would say you have a right to sleep if there's nowhere for you to sleep. That makes sense. People, if you don't allow for a place for someone to sleep, you're going to fall asleep, right? I understand why that would happen. Why don't we respond by saying, all right, we're really going to make sure everyone has a place to sleep? We just don't do it. We are like, no, we need all this money to make sure all these people have a place to sleep. But then we don't do it, right?
And even though we have the billions to do it, I mean, again, Sharon says we can do whatever we want. Sharon Myron from Multnomah County Commission. We can do whatever we want. We've got billions of dollars. Like you said, why are we not doing it?
Yeah.
Just comply, do it, and then enforce.
Yeah. I mean, if it takes the state legislature stepping in and saying, you need to start delivering results before you get money, if it means that people are going to need to file a ballot initiative to make sure that the SHS funds only happen because of results, right? Like
that's just too expensive. I mean, and again, we're getting into all these issues like the legislature, that's a whole other issue. Ballot measure, that's millions of dollars.
Yep.
Signature gathering, which is a dirty business. And then it's like you said, it's the worst of all worlds. It's like, we can't. But I like your ideas. And I feel like it sounds like you're saying you are hopeful that you can do a fair amount from city council, even if it just involves doing things like withholding money from people who are not accountable and not doing what works.
Yeah.
Which is a big deal in and of itself because it doesn't happen around here.
And I hope people... I'm going to wrap it up here because might be my longest episode ever. But this is really like, I honestly didn't expect you to be like this loaded and intelligent.
Yeah, no.
So, but I mean, all three of us, we could probably talk about this for like 6 hours if we wanted to. But you're always welcome back. Tell people really quickly how they can find you and stuff. And
yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm trying to be on TikTok. I'm on DeMelo for Portland. That's DEMELO, and DeMeloforportland.com. Is my website. Please come check me out. Please sign up to get emails from me. I promise I only send them once a week. And I would just love to have the conversation with every Portlander. If you email me at the with the email address that's on my website, it's connect@demeloforportland.com. I will email you back. I really want to bring an open door to city council. And, you're talking about ballot measures. Something I really do believe in is this power that the city government and the city council never exercises, which is the city council can put measures on the ballot.
Thank you.
But also the city council can put questions on the ballot.
Yes, they can.
Yeah, just simple yay
Ben
or
West
nay.
does this all the time as a Multnomah or as a Clackamas County Commissioner. You can do it's like an advisory vote.
Yeah, and I feel like we should be doing
it's almost like a poll. It's awesome.
We should be doing at least one of those a year.
God, you're so right. And we totally don't do that. They never do that.
Because then you have all these problems where you come to city council and people say, no, that doesn't have popular support. But if I can walk in there and say, no, the ballot just showed that this has popular support. Yeah, we just did a
poll basically. Yeah.
Then it's going to be a very different situation. I really think
that's very smart.
We need to be doing that because there's no other way to get a poll of hundreds of thousands of people.
You know what else we can do that I didn't realize until recently is if there's a crappy ballot measure that people, that would have been me on 110, just didn't really realize what they were voting for. Now that's statewide, but let's say it's citywide, Portland. The city council can take it and just send it back for a vote. They actually are allowed to do that. You can vote on a ballot measure. If you're saying, hey, this isn't working, and actually people seem really unsatisfied with this, you can send it on back to the voters.
Yeah.
They never do that.
Yeah.
I didn't even know they could until recently, but they never do it.
I didn't know the other thing you mentioned too, so I'm glad. I'm learning a lot today.
No, yeah, but that's, to really...
You're so smart.
To come
You're
full
exactly
circle
right.
Here, right. I only know that because I went and read the city charter, right?
Which nobody does, especially people running for city council.
I would say it's like, at least for me, I would vote for you right now because you have read this stuff. That's a good baseline.
There's some really fun stuff in there. If you look at the city code, like Nerf guns are basically banned if you really read it closely. Okay. Yeah, stuff like that. But that's the fun little bits you get in between reading it. But I get to read this stuff at the end of my day after dealing with my day job, after dealing with campaigning. Obviously, I can't be calling people at 10 p.m. Yeah. So at 10 p.m. I'm reading the charter and stuff. And
it's so impressive.
If you really do think that what we need here in Portland is transparency accountability and engagement, which I hope everyone believes, because that's how you get everything else. That's how you get cleanliness. That's how you get safety. That's how you get affordability. If you believe in those principles, then please consider donating any amount more than $5 to my campaign, because any Portland resident that gets matched, that goes towards our total of Portland donors. And there's nowhere else that wants to support people who want to make a difference here in politics in the way that Portland does, right? I am not someone who's spending my time on this campaign going to galas in the West Hills. I'm spending my time on this campaign calling people who are doing delivery, who are doing, union work, who are doing construction, who are doing food service, right? These are my friends. These are my family. This is the people who are my neighbors. I want to be your neighbor at city council. So please visit my website, DeMeloforPortland.com.
Yeah, and thanks so much for coming. I would say I can attest that because I live in a 70s ranch home in Daniels District, and he came by here, and so
Oh, wow.
we're
Yeah.
just the regular old people here in Southeast Portland. So, but yeah, thank you so much for coming by. You're always welcome to come back, and
Thanks for having
you.
me.
Thanks
I really,
for the conversation.
yeah, I mean, I really feel like this is the conversation everyone probably just had at Thanksgiving.
hopefully,
yeah,
yeah.
that's how we're going to deal with this problem here. And
Something tells me it's not, but we wish it was. I certainly wish it was. Thank you again.
it's what I was talking about at my Thanksgiving. So
I love it. I'd like to attend that next year.